across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Welcome back. It is the Home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back, of course, tomorrow. Lots to get through this afternoon as well. As you know, Reform UK setting out detailed policy on many things. For mass deportation of illegal immigrants from Britain, the party seeks to build on its local election success and the victory, of course, at the Runcorn by-election. But how else can the party now prove itself? What do they have to do to prove it to you? Meanwhile, Labour's cut to winter fuel payments hurt the party at last week's local elections, where Streeting has admitted, with the Health Secretary saying people aren't happy. And Number 10 now under pressure to rethink the move. In the last few moments, they've said, we're not going to rethink the move. Julia, among others, suspects that means they will rethink the move to some degree. And Britain is quietly updating old war plans amid fears of Russian threats, with experts warning that gas terminals and nuclear plants could be vulnerable to hypersonic missiles, cyber attacks and nuclear strikes. Good Lord. Update it now, please. We'll have details on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Here's a question. What do Reform have to do to prove themselves? 0344 499 1000. I think we'd all agree, and if you voted Reform at local elections, if you were in a neck of the woods where they had local elections, or you're intending to vote Reform, I think we can all agree that winning is one thing, but making change and tangible, demonstrable change is clear as important, right? You want to see it. We know it was a stonking result, hundreds of councillors and total control of 10 county councils. These are big councils. As I was saying to Julia before the news, I live in Kent. It's been a Tory-run council since before Jesus was around. They used to say you could stick a blue rosette on a monkey in Kent and it would get elected. All of that is now history. The Reform boys and girls are in town. But of course, making a difference and having a bit of a landslide in those areas is one thing. Showing that you can bring on change is quite another. And of course, the issue, I think, for many councillors is that the elected county councillors aren't in charge of everything. So you can't suddenly say, I mean, they're talking about, we're going to get strict from work from home. That's probably beyond the remit of county councillors. The likelihood is they won't be able to change that. So you also can't blame them. But there was a bit, in fairness to critics, there was a bit of mood music around. You get us in, we're going to get everybody working back at their desk. You might not be able to do that, but you might. Banning flags. OK, except the country flag, the St George's flag or the county flag. They're going to have no flags knocking around on County Hall, whichever county you are in. That's all right, that's fine, but it's not going to be game-changing. The party is understood, by the way, to be sending in a team of experts into each of the 10 county councils where it's won a majority in order to coach councillors on how to run things. Now, I appreciate that satirists will look at that and laugh. This happens to anyone who suddenly takes over a council. There's a great chance that prior to becoming a county councillor, you might have been, I don't know, an Amazon delivery driver the day before. Suddenly, that you're going to keep doing your day job, and you're also a county councillor, so you're in charge of some stuff. Your knowledge of running a council, as distinct from your knowledge of the party that you currently represent, are two different things. So, yeah, there's going to be some swatting up. That's not, by the way, exclusive to Reform. I think anyone who is new to the job probably requires, a little bit of assistance on how you pull the strings and all the rest of it. I don't imagine if you're a Reform councillor in one of those councils that's now Reform controlled, I don't imagine you're going to get a lot of assistance from, I don't know, the Labour Party. Or could you tell us how to run this bit, please? I think they'll probably be fairly quiet on that. 0344 499 1000. So let me throw the question out like that. What have they got to do now to earn your trust? How much of it is down to county councillors. They can represent things. What can they physically do? Well, Jamie Jenkins coming on with us in just a little bit. And Jamie, of course, is right across that detail. And remember, this time next year, Wales could potentially be a reform government. You'd have them running not just a local council, or big as those councils. I mean, they're real sizable councils, these areas that they've got control of, but an entire region or a country. Wales could be the first significant, really, I mean, this was significant, but Wales could be in another league in that respect. 0344 499 1000. So Richard Tice, Deputy Leader, said he will use its new control of 10 councils to use every lever available to block renewable projects. He said that he's going to write to potential developers in Lincolnshire, projects following Reform's historic local elections victory on Friday, to see what they can do. They are declaring war on net zero developments in the countryside. But again, is that something that as county councillors they can fully stop? The obvious one, and I think they probably can do something on this, I mean, after all, they are county councillors, you are there for a reason, there's got to be some things you can do. I think it's going to be interesting what they can do with housing migrants. Now, this is going to be fascinating because Kent is very much the coalface of this issue. I can't tell you, this was my patch journalistically. I know it really well. Roger Goff and others that used to run the council, I've interviewed these guys for many, many times over the years. It is a constant, and you've got children's services which are strained as a result of the migration component to those services. I think county councils have an obligation to look, this is interesting, to look after so if you come as a 16-year-old, I think the county council is obliged to look after you until you're 25. It's something like that. How much of that could reform change? And again, this is Kent. It speaks for itself. It's where Dover is, for goodness sake. This is where a big slice of this story literally happened. So this will be completely on their watch now. But what can they significantly do to make changes? Can they say, as a council, we are going to ban any council within Kent County Council from housing people who arrived in the UK on boats? Will they be literally able to do that? Can they stop all spending on renewables, if that is part of their thinking? What can they do about potholes, cycle lanes? I mean, look, because you've obviously got town councils as well. So, I mean, where I live, the most insane, quite literally, the most insane bike lane project has just taken place. It's so convoluted, I wouldn't be able to do it justice by trying to impart what they've done on a major chunk of the A25. Very, very busy road. They were hell-bent over there on the local council to get a cycle lane in. And in order to do this, what they had, aside from disturbing the road for about 3 months to make it happen, it's so convoluted, it's so stupid and ridiculous just to get, a quarter of a mile of cycle lane in. Because it comes to an end at some point and then goes nowhere as far as I can see. 0344 499 1000. What do Reform UK now need to do to prove themselves to you? Our lines are open. Let's get a word on this from Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster. Candice, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Nice to have you with us as ever. Let's start then with the big reform story. It's still the ripples of that election are being felt far and wide still 4 days later. Huge success locally. Will they be able to prove themselves is the question. Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage speaking on this very issue about Reform's plans.
We are going to be quite radical. Work from home, forget it. If you're a DEI officer, I suggest you look for another job. So things are going to be different. We can't wave magic wands. We don't pretend to, but it'll be a very different approach to local government.
A very different approach to local government, Candice, and this is going to be the real test, isn't it? People who voted Reform, people who support Reform, jubilant at this result, very significant. 10 big councils they're running, hundreds and hundreds of councillors, but now the real work starts.
Yeah, I think what they need to do now is focus on competency and service delivery. I think if at a local level they gain a reputation for just doing the basics, what people want, the sorting out the bins, for instance, not focusing on DEI initiatives, keeping people's bills low. These are the things people care about at a local level. Yeah. And I think councils have got a horrible reputation for either being horribly incompetent, you think of all the bankrupt councils, but also just creating so much misery with all these green initiatives, for instance. I mean, I have about 5 different bins that I've got to sort all my rubbish into. Yeah. And everyone that I know hates having 5 sets of bins outside their house every day. I mean, you just see them on suburban streets. I mean, you can't move for bins. I remember the Spectator wrote a brilliant article about it, comparing them to Daleks. I mean, they're just the most unsightly things. So I think if reform can focus on those sorts of things and focus on really local issues that matter to people, that will give them the credibility that they need. So they're not just seen as an insurgent party, but they're actually a party of government.
Yeah, and that sense of change, if they're able to deliver change, and I don't mean that they won't have the desire to do it, but if they're able to literally legally, what powers do you have? We don't often investigate what your local council can and cannot do. I'm pretty sure bins is on the list, however. Yeah. Potholes has got to be on the list. You are controlling a budget, you're voting on budgets, etc. So it's all very well saying we're going to get rid of some of those daft DEI roles and jobs, and I think most sane people would go, yeah, that would work. But it's, bearing in mind a lot of the councils are tens, hundreds of millions of pounds in debt, saving 98 grand on the DEI department probably won't touch the sides. People have got to feel that change is there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, absolutely. It's the big things. I mean, I remember looking at the breakdown for my local council on costs, and it was things like waste management. Waste management was far and away the biggest cost. Yeah. And you just wondered, with all the green initiatives, are they going for the most cost effective and the most efficient measure? And I don't think so. I don't think they're doing that at all. And I think if reform can start introducing things that people just think of as common sense, because I think at the local council level, from what I've noticed, is that people tend to sort of indulge their sort of radical ideological fantasies. They really do. I mean, that's the place where they think I can get paid 100 grand a year for, I don't know, suddenly deciding that I'm going to have an investment fund, which is what happened in Slough, with absolutely zero background in venture capital. And it failed miserably, and it was a huge waste of taxpayers' money. I think this is also the moment as well, that people are very, very concerned about their taxes being misused. Sure. And I think that if they can, like you say, if they can do that properly, where it's proper savings being made, the big ticket things, that will be important. Yeah, and it might well be a sort of re-engagement with local government. I've said for years that some of the greatest stories, also some of the greatest examples of corruption happen. There's a lot goes on in Westminster, but some of the absolute peaches happen in local government. It rarely gets talked about unless it becomes so seismic it sort of hits the nationals. I think it's only Private Eye that do their Rotten Boroughs column, which looks at some of this stuff. But generally speaking, there's all manner of malfeasance and dodge pottery going on down there at local level that we tend not to discuss too much. So it might reinvigorate an interest, if there ever was an interest, certainly in local politics, because it's really important. And these are sizable councils that they're going to be running, and of course with sizable budgets as well. There's naturally, in the Venn diagram, there's always a bit of a crossover between what's happening nationally, what's happening locally, and on the national level, which had an effect on the local level, things like Labour cutting winter fuel payments. Clearly, that has resonated. They ain't going to go away for the next 4 or 5 years. So that's around the neck of Keir Starmer. Downing Street has ruled out a U-turn on their decision to axe the winter fuel payments following fears of electoral damage. Let's hear from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who was speaking earlier on Times Radio when asked about a possible change.
Not that I'm aware of. I wouldn't at this stage be close to those discussions. They're normally matters for budgets and spending reviews.
Should it be discussed at least, though? You know your way around politics, Wes Streeting. Does that policy need to be looked at again, do you think?
Well, it's been discussed for days in the media and in the newspapers today. But whether it's, all I'd say on this is that whether it's winter fuel or it's employers' NICs, or it's the changes we're making to non-DOMs, or ending tax breaks for private schools. We've had a lot of opposition from the opposition parties to all of these measures, but they welcome the investment that it pays for in our NHS, in our schools, in other public services. And you can't have one without the other.
Well, there it is. Downing Street has now ruled out a U-turn, Candice, on this one. Julia was saying just before the news when that element of the story broke, that probably means they are going to have a U-turn on this. What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to have to look at some way of modifying it, because I think anyone could have told them that this was going to create so much anger. I mean, 100%. People I spoke to on the local level, they always say on the doorstep, but it's absolutely true. This is what people were angry at, especially in, quite in northern seats, in places where people typically vote Labour. They said, but we never expected this from Labour. This is bizarre. One, because Labour always opposed the Conservatives on stuff like this, but also it just doesn't feel like something the Labour Party would have done. I think it was one of the most politically toxic things they could have done, because it didn't save that much money comparatively, not really. And it's going against, it's expending huge amounts of political capital. I mean, they had to, if you're going to do something like that, there needs to be a huge gain. For instance, if you're looking at the worklessness crisis, I mean, that's a very thorny issue to tackle. But the savings you would make would be so huge, it would justify that. And people would understand. But this just seemed pointless and actually a little bit cruel, because they set the threshold so low. That
was the problem, wasn't it? Had they said, look, we all agree, I've said it for years, if you're a multi-millionaire, I don't think you should be getting winter fuel allowance. If you get 50 grand a year, you shouldn't be getting winter fuel allowance. But they set it so low that it meant it hoovered up vast amounts of people who really did need that extra payment. And to make it worse, so many of those new Labour MPs prior to the election were photographed holding placards saying your winter fuel allowance is safe with us. We won't let the Tories remove your winter. It was all of that stuff. They were very public about it. It was worse almost than the Nick Clegg, we will give you free university fees or whatever it was back then. This was a terrible, terrible look and just an extraordinary own goal for Labour. They didn't need to go there, but they did. And now they're saying there's going to be no U-turn. But you do wonder whether they'll re-look at the threshold issue, because that, as you also said, Candice, that's really the issue, isn't it? It's not the principle. It's the issue of where you draw the line.
Yeah, and I think people aren't stupid and irrational. I mean, if they can understand, okay, a super well-off person doesn't need it, but a person who's on 11 grand a year, and when you're older, the cold really affects you. It affects you really, really, really badly. And there's a trope around that all pensioners are millionaires. It's absolutely not true. There are plenty of people who really struggle, because we have some of the highest energy costs in the world, and the cost of living has only gone up.
100%. Candice, stay with us. Lots more stories still to come right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. And that question, what do Reform UK now need to do to prove themselves? And I ask you that as to whether you're an objective onlooker or a Reform voter. Whether you voted at these elections or intend to at future ones. What are they got to do now? Because the big win has happened. It's seismic, it's significant, it's a game changer, it's a tipping point. But of course, they've now got to deliver. Your thoughts, our lines are open. This is Talk.
Nigel Farage and Reform do not have to do anything at the moment other than not be Labour or the Tories. You know, all he has to do is not be Keir Starmer and not be Kenny Badenoch.
Right. Now, but also, I think what will also become a key battleground, of course, will be this business that was introduced by Zia Yusuf on Sunday and Laura Kunsberg and other shows, where he says, you know, we're going to actively challenge the reform councils where we are, particularly in Kent, which will be an interesting one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This comes from Sue. Says it makes sense to focus on immigration and the cost to the taxpayer with all the knock-on effects. Also, ditch net zero and the economy will begin to recover and the cost of living stabilises, says Sue. And of course, all of that is dependent on what or how much, as county councillors, Reform can do. If they can galvanise some significant headlines based on significant policy, then that would be an extraordinary showcase to go, look, we've done it. We've literally done it on a local level. Why would we not do it on a national level? So that's going to be interesting. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. Candice Holdsworth is with us looking at the big stories of the day. This one is a headline we don't really want to read, Candice, that Starmer prepares for an attack by Russia. Good Lord. We're updating 20-year-old contingency plans amid fears of a Russian missile or a nuke attack. I didn't see this headline coming.
I know, that was frightening. I think everyone felt a sort of lurch in their stomach when they read that, because we do live in very uncertain times, you know. I mean, it doesn't seem like a remote possibility. Yeah. I think two things, One, I think that we know that defence spending is nowhere near what it should be in this country. Plenty of military experts have said we are not prepared for an attack, and that's something that we need to take way, way, way more seriously. So I think America putting pressure on European countries and Britain to meet their defence spending targets is a very positive thing. Two, I think the negative thing is that a lot of people will say Keir Starmer should not be creating conflict with Russia. He should focus on the home front. I think a lot of people would think that. They'd be very, very, very critical of him, you know, taking this stance against Putin when we're nowhere near ready to defend ourselves.
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, if Putin did suddenly start talking like this, then that's one thing. If Putin went, I'll give it a test. I'll just fire a, I'll fire a dinky-linky little missile to start with, one that just lands, somewhere in the middle of a field or something. I don't know what we would do in retaliation, because we've got about 7 soldiers and 6 sailors left in our defence, and I think a rusty submarine knocking around somewhere. We'll watch with interest. Also, this one, visa crackdown on nationalities blamed for asylum costs. Labour plans to cut visas from countries with high asylum claims. But hasn't Keir Starmer been calling for this since November? Let's remind ourselves what he said back then.
We will publish a white paper imminently which sets out a plan to reduce immigration. The Migration Advisory Committee is already conducting a review. And where we find clear evidence of sectors that are over-reliant on immigration, we will reform the points-based system and make sure that applications for the relevant visa routes, whether it's the skilled worker route or the shortage occupation list, will now come with new expectations on training people here in our country. We will also crack down on any abuse of the visa routes. For far too long, we've been casual about malpractice in our labour market, which sends a clear signal overseas that we're a soft touch.
Well, that's what he says. Labour planning to reject work and study visas from Pakistan, Nigeria, Sri Lanka to curb asylum system abuse, Candice. I mean, has he picked the right countries, and is it likely to work?
Well, Denmark started using that sort of granular approach. I mean, they would publish lists of, for example, migrants who were involved in crime, and then that was used to inform immigration policy. So I think that is actually very important. So I think, if we can get the data on that, it also allows the public to have a say, and they can put pressure on their local MPs to change policy. I think Labour knows that they have to have a more hardline approach to this. I think the Conservatives know as well. They're doomed if they don't. So, I mean, both Labour and the Conservatives have just had their head in the sand about this issue for a very, very long time. And now they're waking up to the reality that the public won't stand for it anymore. You know, they've taken people's votes for granted. And I think those days are over now, and you see a party like Reform is just running with this issue. They're just running with us. Yeah. And it happened in America as well. I mean, you had the MAGA movement basically realized no one wanted to face this issue down, so they were going to. And look what happened.
Well, look what happened, and that replication is obviously the area that Nigel Farage is focused on. And it also encompasses a bit of this, really, because it's sort of the woke madness story of the day. The full Monty musical featuring male strippers has sparked criticism for issuing woke warnings about nudity, despite its theme of bearing all. Let's have a look at the original British trailer from back in 1997.
No one said anything to me about the full Monty.
Are you in or are you out?
So this is your great money-making enterprise, is it, Gary?
Strippers?
You?
Fox Searchlight Pictures presents...
I mean, I couldn't, could I?
Why not?
The most revealing comedy of the year.
We're doing this then, just this once. We're doing it right.
The full Monty.
It was a very good British film. It looks a little dated now, Candice, but it did really well. It was beautifully executed, and obviously it's about, you know, a load of working guys becoming strippers. But now it needs a little warning, just in case people get upset. You've got to have a warning saying this film might include strippers, despite it being called The Full Monty, despite everybody on planet Earth knowing exactly what it's about.
Oh, it's so funny. Like, we've just become ever more pill clutching. You know, you sort of expect society to become more open-minded, more free and easy, but we've had a reversal. I mean, you think about the time that the Full Monty was made in. I mean, people had a sense of humour. There was like a real libertine attitude. And now everyone's just like hand-wringing, oh my gosh, there's all these horrible things going on. I think that is the most ridiculous thing. I hope we can loosen woke culture's stranglehold, because I mean, it's just the most miserable thing in the world. I do find it funny though, whenever you have anything about male stripping, which the Full Monty did, it's just always like women screaming with laughter and being really humorous, and it's just brilliant. It's such a brilliant film, and I don't think we'll ever see one made like it again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never quite sure what is attractive about a man's pendulous collection of doom, frankly. As I've said many, many times, God would never be given any design awards for inventing testicles. Let's be perfectly truthful about this. Nonetheless, you know, this is meant to be, you know, it's fun. But we're also living in a world, of course, where we've had similar trigger warnings put on Monty Python movies, and even The Three Little Pigs has a little trigger warning. I don't know, what does it contain? Wolf aggression? Pig death? I don't know. How do they... House destruction? What do they have on there, for goodness sake? It's all pretty...
ridiculous.
It's all pretty grim stuff, isn't it? There we are. Listen, Candice, pleasure as always. Thank you for being with us. Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster on the big stories of the day. Over to you on some of this stuff. 0344 499 1000. Particularly that question about Reform UK. What are they got to do now? What's the next move for Reform? What do they have to do to prove themselves? And indeed, I don't think they would argue, now they are in power in 10 substantial regions of this country, then yeah, they do have to prove themselves. That's part and parcel of democracy. The job starts now, but what have they got to do first? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
This is 25 to 2, by the way. This in from Gary says, let's get real. Reform run a handful of councils so they can't implement any of the headline policies they have on immigration or net zero or income tax cuts because their hands are tied by laws and regulations passed a national level by a Labour government who, let's be honest, are desperate for them to fail. All they can do at best is prove that they are capable of running the public services that they are responsible for efficiently, which, let's be fair, will be a vast improvement on how Labour, Lib Dems and Cons have spent our money of recent times. It's that, in many respects, isn't it? You've got to be, if you can do it diligently and responsibly, the focus is disproportionately going to be on those councils. You wouldn't get quite, when a council changes from Tory to Labour, whatever, nobody really blinks, but there'll be all eyes on those 10 councils, and they are substantial. They're doubling down after its big wins last week, including the Runcorn and Hellsby by-election, unveiling a bold plan to do things like deportation of illegal immigrants. Mr Farage's party is planning to fight the Home Office to block asylum seekers from being forced on their communities. Meanwhile, expert teams will be sent in to overhaul local services in the 10 councils that they now run. In a moment, we'll speak with Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator, about what exactly you can and can't do in local authorities. First, though, Gawain Towler, former advisor to Nigel Farage. Gawain, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon indeed.
Nice to have you with us now, because you've been with Nigel through thick and thin, UKIP, Brexit and the beginning of reform, etc. You know the terrain, you know the intentions. This was a glorious moment for reform and reform voters last week. But of course, to coin a phrase, now the real work begins.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking forward to it.
It's going to be tough, though, isn't it? Because there are certain limitations, but it doesn't mean to say you can't prove your worth and your efficiency and your ability to run something.
I think the bottom line is we have ambitions to be the party of government of this country. If we have those ambitions, we have to prove that we're capable of delivering at any level in which we get elected. So whilst we do have a target on our back, and I quite agree with you, for the first time ever we might see national security of local government. But that's fine, that's good, we're looking forward to it and we welcome it because we want people to see that we are absolutely we do what we say on the tin, and we relish that opportunity.
And in terms of what you can do, I mean, this is going to be the interesting question, as our previous communicator Gary just said. Obviously, you can't change immigration policy as a whole, but there might be areas such as, I don't know, housing immigrants at a local level, which of course is on the agenda. That might be an area that certainly, I'm pretty sure, particularly in Kent, that reform will be exploring.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there'll be pushback if the government and the Home Office decides to push people into those areas which we now control. But the large majority of the work done at local council is bread and butter stuff when it comes to welfare and things of that sort. But I think, just imagine you are earning large sums of money as the chief executive of, say, Lancashire or Staffordshire County Council. Friday must have been a bit of a wake-up call. It's true that our councillors have, in large part, very little experience of dealing with the bureaucratic blob that is running most of these authorities, but they have very little experience of dealing with us.
Yes.
And we are going to be absolutely fierce in the prosecution of value for money for our electors and for those people who have voted for us, and of course those people who haven't voted for us in those areas. And so it's going to be, what often still feels the way is at local authority level, the authorities, the staff members, all the rest of it, turn to the council and say, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, no, that's too hard. And up until now, many people who are sort of steeped in that culture go, oh, all right. Our people will say, why not? This is what we're elected to do. We understand the limitations of what an authority can do, but if we want to change X, why can't we? Tell us, explain exactly why this is not possible. Yeah. And we will be pushing very hard on those points.
We've lived for so long in this sort of perverse world of groupthink where no matter whether you're Labour, Lib Dems, Tories, they move around, but they broadly...
It doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in.
Indeed, you know, and this idea that, oh no, you can't possibly change that. Well, you can if you can be bothered, you know, or you really care. And of course, that's what's been missing. That's why Reform have done so well. I suppose, Gawain, there is an argument, isn't there, that, you know, at worst, all Reform have got to do is not cock it up.
I would like to think that we could do better than that. But by the way, there will be mistakes. There will be errors. We will do things, we will make errors. But the people of this country are remarkable. They are quite forgiving. They understand that errors are made. They understand things like that. As long as you own it, as long as you hold your hands up, we tried to do that, it didn't work. This is why. As long as you own your mistakes, people are actually quite forgiving. Yeah. It's hypocrisy and cover-up that we hate.
It's fairly daunting, though, isn't it? That, you know, 1 minute you were doing an ordinary 9-to-5 job, you cared for democracy, you joined Reform, you stood as a county councillor, and now you're going to be in charge of 500 million quid of taxpayers' money. I mean, that's a big old shift in your day's work.
It is, but I think the sort of people that we've had standing for us up and down the country, by and large, are talented, able, driven people who desperately want best for their country. Now, as I say, there will be mistakes made. Some people might find the workload is huge, though I've never seen that many councillors who are hospitalised through overwork. Yeah. But I think that there is that drive and that ambition is there, and there is a can-do attitude. The amount of, oh, you can't do that, that's what we're overturning, that's what we're changing. Yeah. I think I was told by a number of people this morning that this policy that the chairman announced about flags, they'll put blocks in the way, they'll make it impossible for you to make this change, you won't be able to. I said, why? And if some council official decides that they want to die on a hill, that you can't change the rules about flying whichever political flag you want to choose, rather than the Cross St George, the Union Jack and your county flag, then bring it on. Bring it on.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, these people have existed in this bizarre parochial world for forever. And, you know, the idea that somebody comes in and has the audacity to change it.
These senior civil servants at local authority level, they pop up in Cornwall, they make a hash of it there, and then they turn up as chief executive of say, Norfolk.
Yes. Yeah, that's
strange milieu. Nobody knows who they are. They get paid more than the Prime Minister, and there's no accountability. Well, there's going to be accountability, at least 10 local authorities going forward.
Yeah, I think there's only 6 of them. They just interchange jobs for.
It does feel that way.
Mooch around. Absolutely, and they, of course, they leave each local authority with a massive gold-plated pension and payoff, and then they, as you say,
and the roundabout spins them out, and they turn up in Herefordshire
every time. Listen, Gawain, lovely to have you on. We will speak again, I'm sure. Gawain Towler, former advisor of decades to Nigel Farage, still very much within the Reform UK party, and it's that exact point, isn't it, about that can't be done because we've never done it that way. And even if you're not a Reform voter, I would say if you care about democracy, you know, if you really, if you value and cherish the idea that votes count and they mean something, then you should also value the opportunity to change things, even if you don't always agree with every dotted I or crossed T. The mere principle that things can change should be something we should all embrace and endorse. Let's get a word on what is going on with our friend Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator. Jamie, good afternoon to you.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. All good?
Yeah, all good at this end. Nice to have you with us as ever. It's going to be interesting that we've never really seen a seismic shift of... Well, you don't often get many parties suddenly hoover up 10 big councils at a local election on any day of the week, even if we are talking about the sort of big 3 parties, as it were. But Reform, of course, have done it. It's significant. Nobody's going to underplay that. Now the work starts. And, of course, the question that I keep hearing, and I think a lot of people are wondering, how much power do you actually have as a county councillor?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing, Ian, a lot of people who would have been voting more, and even at a local level, they tend to be what's going on nationally in the national picture. And if you're disgruntled with the government, and we've obviously haven't long had this Labour government, and we had a Tory government before it, your disgruntlement there tends to fall down into kind of local government elections as well. And as you know, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again. And I think the public have got to that point where we've voted Labour, we've voted Tories, and we're not getting anything different. Now, in terms of what they can have control over, obviously in these councils, a big chunk of the budget goes on adult social care and children's services. So those are the kind of things they're going to have to oversee. And you're right to point out that many people who've gone and stood for the Reform Party, but it's not just Reform, it'll be the same for other parties. They haven't had a competency-based job interview here. They're going to have to pick up the baton and run with what they're going to be doing from day one. So that's going to be the big challenge. But look at what the current the Labour and the Tory party have been doing across the country. Look at Birmingham with Binns. They've been bankrupt. You've had the Tories in Woking and Thurrock with risky investments that have caused them huge financial problems. But Reform will get more scrutiny than any of the other parties. And I think, as Gawain was talking about there, bring it on. I think they're talking about, we expect to see the scrutiny, but why not do something different? We've been voting these parties in over and over again. Doing things differently, you might see some different results.
Yeah. You have the county council, but of course, chief executives are a different role altogether, and they hold an awful lot of power too. So there's going to be some battles ahead, I would imagine. It would be strange if there wasn't, but much of the areas that people care about are not in the gift of a county councillor, work from home being an example.
That is an example there, but I think what you'll see with Reform, they'll probably be highlighting more and more what is not in their gift, and they'll be looking to kind of highlight things that where Gawain was just saying on the show there, that if they're asked to do something and they can't do it, and they think that's something that we should be able to do, they will shout from the rooftops in terms of kind of the stuff. I think you're right to point out earlier, Ian, that when you've been asked of how, say, some of these migrants that are coming over on small boats in local areas, Reform have said they'll battle against that, and will that then push more into other areas, and then they'll win more council seats if local people don't want to see that? That's going to be an important thing, but we're definitely seeing this huge shift. Next year we've got the Welsh Senedd elections, and that could be the next part of where Reform kind of expand into kind of more power across the UK.
Well, the Welsh First Minister, of course, has said that she will call out Labour in Westminster when it gets it wrong on Wales. There was I would say, a fairly condemning tone from the First Minister there.
Yeah, and she's been saying that today, but I think ultimately, if you take in the Welsh Labour Party, they can call out people in Westminster, but part of the issue that's going to be fought, I think, in the Welsh election in the next 12 months is what the Welsh Labour Party have been doing here. We've had the previous First Minister, Ron Gethin, he resigned, and there's some cloud with some donation scandal through his election campaign. We've had, obviously, the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in Wales that we've talked about in the past. The NHS in Wales is worse than in England. And what's interesting, I suppose, when you go into the next 12 months, Ian, is many of the Labour Party Senate members now are stepping down themselves. They don't want to have that bloodbath of going into the next election. So she may want to call out Keir Starmer on certain things, but I think most of the scrutiny will be on the Welsh Labour Party themselves in the next 12 months. And the interesting thing will be is that if you go back to 2019, when we had a national election, the European elections, under the previous name, the Brexit Party, the party there, they won 19 of the 22 local council areas. So there's a huge support underlying for the Brexit Party. If that follows through into the Reform Party, there's going to be some interesting things ahead in the next 12 months, I think.
Absolutely right. Listen, Jamie, thank you for your time as ever. Jamie Jenkins, he's an economist, political and economic commentator. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. This one from Deborah. Enjoy the show. Obviously, there was always an induction in any new job, especially a career-changing one. One thing Reform can stop is the application for barbers, shops, nail salons, etc. It will also stop immigration if they have nowhere to launder money. That's a start. Well, it will be things like that. How much effect can they have? I mean, looking after bin collections, you've then got the interesting relationship between county councils and local borough councils. They're not all cut from the same political cloth, so there'll be some interesting movements in that respect. How much can you seriously do? I think, and when I said this to Gawain earlier, that all they've got to do is not cock it up. there is something in that. Because remember, the only time we hear stories about local authorities is when there's, Birmingham with the bin strikes and areas where there is a council's gone bankrupt and the government have had to go in. And if they can avoid all of that and appear to be running a fairly clean and steady ship, but whilst I think people want them to do much more than that, it will be enough, perhaps be enough, for people to go, do you know what? They've actually made an impressive job of this. That limitations on their powers or their ambitions are there for all to see, but they can make some difference. 0344 499 1000. What do Reform UK now need to do to prove themselves to you if you voted Reform or intend to vote Reform? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
There's an important point about justice being seen to be done. And I think the major problem we have with the integration tribunals at the moment is that justice is rarely seen to be done. We see all these crazy-looking decisions coming out of the tribunal, and anyone who wants to understand them has to read through a 40-page case decision. It shouldn't be this complicated. We have spent the last sort of 4 or 5 decades wrapping this issue up, or issues around asylum and immigration, in lots and lots of really complicated law.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Michelle says, good day. I like that. Good day to you, kind sir. Reducing immigration will help the economy and cost of living. It's the root of so many issues. We can then rebuild. Yes, yes and yes. But of course, at a local level, how much mood music can Reform set as county councillors? Andy in Thatcham says, I'm not surprised Labour are now talking about updating our systems and responses to Russia. Wait for the attack line at Reform. We are protecting the UK. Reform are cozying up to Putin. And if they do this, it'll push even more voters to Reform. See the Democrats in 2024. Very good point as well. And one in from Simon, the British people don't see the taking away of the winter fuel payment as necessarily a threat to life of the vulnerable pensioner. They see it as symbolic of the way the British people are being treated as second to overseas aid. 11.6 billion for overseas climate aid, billions for Ukraine, millions for housing illegal migrants. They see the lie of the 22 billion black hole and no longer feel represented by this current government, nor the last one for that matter. All Reform have got to do is prioritise the people of the UK. What a radical idea, eh? Have a good day, says someone. Yeah, it's that absolutely that. The winter fuel thing is one thing, but happening at the same time when loads of money is being spent on God knows where, and Simon brilliantly lists the obvious, that's the pinch, right? That's the area where you go, hang on a second, what? So my nan can't turn on her heating, but matey down the road, who just hot-footed it from God knows where, has got a house and heating. Wow. Ray's in Colchester. What do you got for us, Ray? Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, listen, there is absolutely no doubt that if the powers that be and the, shall we say, the blob that is there is ready and waiting now to actually stop them from doing any changes at all, and will highlight any failure. So the only way to actually get around that is to clearly communicate to the general public what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and any obstructions you get from that blob. Yeah. And you basically lay it out very, very clearly, and you don't take it lying down, oh, no, we can't do it, it's impossible, because it's amazing how many things are impossible aren't once they've actually been tried.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I keep seeing a few times I've seen former councillors who lost their seats to reform say quite openly, not vindictively, they've said, look, you know, there really isn't a lot of areas you can cut money. You think you can from the outside until you get in there. You go, oh, right, OK. Because there's some people around who go, well, yeah, if you can cut that if you want, but by doing that, you're going to create a problem here. So you'll have to move some money from that budget to that budget. It's not as easy as it looks, seems to be the tone, Ray.
Yeah, but nothing is easy as it looks. And if you take that attitude, you may as well carry on voting for the main party.
And isn't that the skill of being a politician? The skill is to find ways around these things.
Exactly. That's the point. Because if you're going to be radical and change it, you've got to be radical and change it. Yeah. And if you can't change it, you've got to highlight the reasons why you can't do so. Of course you have. The obstruction that's put in locally by various people who have vested interest, by various things, so that people become aware that actually, you know what? We've tried, we've done it, we've managed to achieve X, Y, and Z, but we couldn't do this, and this is the reason, and these are the people why we couldn't do it. And when you get the chance, you need to be able to get rid of them. Because if we don't try and change anything, we just go, you know what, it's the system. Yeah. Then I'm afraid the system isn't serving us now.
Well, if we have that, we might as well just have civil servants in the role and no elected representatives, because they can do it. If nothing is ever these immovable objects apparently that sit there in local and national government. It's a great point, Ray. Thank you very much indeed, Ray in Colchester. Phil is in Hull. What do you got for us, Phil? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. A couple of things really. Yeah. The first thing about reform. Basically, what they've got to do is just be competent. That's all they need to do, just be competent. If you look around at the main parties, we can think of three places offhand that have been awful. Birmingham, Thurrock, Slough, you can go on forever. Yep. As well as the good authorities, there are good authorities. But the point is, all they've got to do is be competent. But if they've vetted the right people who come in, who I call the normal working class people, who say, I want my bins emptied in time, I want the potholes filling in, I want this, I want that. That's all they have to do. They don't have to be dramatic and try and change the world. And a lot of things they haven't got any control over anyway. And the other thing is talking about winter fuel payment. Right, I didn't get it, so it cost me £300, but I'll survive. The thing is, I was talking to a lady who was £172 above the limit, so she lost it. Wow. So she lost it. But at the same time, I've got a small pension on top of my old age pension.
Yep.
So I can't have it. I can't have the winter fuel payment, but I pay a small amount of tax, but that can go towards somebody on £60,000 a year who decides to send the kid to school for free breakfast. That's going to be run out right through the country, according to them. So, on one hand, you've got too much money for an old age pension to get the winter fuel, and on the other hand, if you've got the same amount of money, you can send your kid for a free meal on everybody else. Now, don't get me... I'm not against the children, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I was on free school meals, and we were well off. But there's no consistency in what they do or what they say. even going back to this today, we're looking at the winter fuel payments. No, we're not looking at the winter fuel payments. They can't make up their mind whether they're indecisive or not.
But can reform do anything to make a tangible difference?
Do you mean locally?
Yeah, locally.
Well, yeah. I mean, if they do what people want instead of like the government, what the government want, then that's the way forward, isn't it? Surely that the main priorities of people are like everybody says. Get my bins emptied, get the potholes filled. I mean, obviously you can't do anything about social care and stuff like that because that's mandated from above. There's several things mandated from above, but the other things you can, and it's what people locally want.
And you've got to be seen to be the party that ran it, even if you couldn't do everything, as Gwaine Towler said to us a little earlier, you know, there will be some errors and some bumps in the road. That goes with any administration. But if you can keep a clean sheet, broadly speaking, it will serve them rather well. Phil in Hull, thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. What do Reform UK now need to do to prove themselves? We'll take some more calls and comment from you on the other side of the news, and we'll look at the biggest stories of the day politically. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. Welcome back. Coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock, it is the home of common sense. As we know, Reform's setting out some detailed policies on areas such as mass deportation for illegal immigrants from Britain, as the party seeks to build on local election success and victory in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. The local MP there now, Sarah Pocham, will be sworn in around about 20 minutes' time. We'll bring you the pictures of that here on Talk. But how else can the party now prove itself? Big successes, running local government, 10 huge county councils. What have they got to do to prove they can do it on a national scale? Also this afternoon, Downing Street has now ruled out a U-turn on means testing winter fuel payments, despite Health Secretary Wes Streeting admitting it hurt Labour in last week's local elections and acknowledging that people are not happy, said Mr Streeting. No, they're not. Labour going, there's going to be no U-turn. That often means there will be some sort of U-turn, just not a full one, so they don't lose face, as if they haven't lost enough of that anyway. Hardly got one left, either of them. And Britain is quietly updating old war plans amid fears of a Russian threat, with experts warning that gas terminals, nuclear plants could be vulnerable to hypersonic missiles, cyber attacks and nuclear strikes. When two tribes go to war, are we back in that territory? Man alive. Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Claire in Berkeley says, Ian, I will be 100% voting reform in the Senate elections next year. I mean, this could be the real game changer, of course, in Wales. They wasted all the money on the ludicrous 20-mile-an-hour speed limit when our roads are full of potholes. Our bin collections have just changed from 2 to 3 weeks weekly, and immigrants are being bussed into our area regularly. We are fed up of being ignored. Nearly everyone I speak to says they will be voting reform. I mean, that will be earthquake territory politically if reform were to gain full control there. And again, it does come down to, it's interesting that Claire mentions the 20-mile-an-hour limit. I was talking about this cycle lane near where I live, and also on another road, kind of slightly connected to it, they've been doing some traffic lights outside the school, which they said will be doing some work here for 2 weeks, meant to be during the Easter holidays. And here we are, like nearly 5 weeks later, and they've still got the temporary lights up. But I did notice in this very small sort of, well, relatively small junction, it's kind of a crossroads, if you like, they've spent a lot of money on trying to carve out a semblance of a cycle lane in there. And they've got the little badges, which is a cyclist, and they've got a big blue sign that tells the cycle. I never saw anybody in the world cycle in this. In fact, it's right near 2 schools. Good luck if you're a cyclist using any area at that time, because it's rammed to the gills with little kids going to and from school. But the local council went, no, we've got to get the cycle thing in there. So how much just in the signage for the cycle lane did they spend? Because if I drive about 500 yards from these new-fangled signs, which probably cost a couple of grand, there's the biggest pothole I've ever seen in my area. And it's been there for at least 8 months now. No one's sought to repair it. So it is all of those things. Let's get a word on all of this and the other big stories of the day. Poppy Coburn is assistant comment editor at The Telegraph. Poppy, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you back with us. So listen, let's start with this reform kind of earthquake moment from last week. I mean, it was big. Nobody disputes that. They now run 10 councils, and these are quite significant councils with big budgets as well. I mean, this is where the real work begins, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've kind of got this narrative in our minds about how reform is kind of on this path where it's kind of come from a very small kind of protest party to now one that legitimately looks like it could be a party of government. But I think we still underestimate just how incredible that victory really was for them. I mean, seriously, to have taken that many councils over, who've showed up the Tories in their heartlands. I mean, what they did in Kent specifically is sort of thing. In those real true blue Tory heartlands, they've just taken it completely. Yeah. So I think sometimes you can make the argument that the momentum that comes with that is as powerful as the victories themselves. There's almost this sense now that we have that it's just inevitable that reform are going to keep building success upon success upon success.
Yeah. I made the point a little earlier, Poppy. Kent is where I live and grew up. I know this area well. I mean, it's always been Tory. It was Tory since before Jesus arrived, I think. I mean, it's been Tory forever, and people would argue you could put you could put a blue rosette on a rabid donkey and it will get voted in Kent. It's been that case for a long time, but of course the new kids are in town and they've smashed the system, and in they come, and that's great. But of course there are limitations to local government as distinct from national government. It's not as if you're completely impotent, but you haven't got quite free rein on everything. I don't think councillors can compel people to work from home, to stop working from home, for example, which is one area I know Reform feels strongly about, but they might find their hands tied on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, completely. The thing we kind of forget is it's difficult if your name is Reform and you're going to struggle to actually get reforms through. And the reason for that is that local government is a bit of a fiction in and of itself. So there's been a lot of stories, high-profile stories about councils that are about to go bankrupt. Either have gone bankrupt or about to go bankrupt. Obviously, Birmingham was the one everyone was thinking about. And the reason why all this stuff is happening is because central government is putting all of these reforms onto local government. It's making them go bankrupt. So they're having to pay for SEND costs, for example. They're having to pay for special educational needs. They're having to pay for care of the elderly in the community. And these are things that are bankrupt. I mean, they bankrupt anybody, right? So what can Reform really do in that situation? I mean, they've been given a very difficult situation that needs to be handled at the national level. Although, of course, I suppose their rebuttal would be, give us 4 years and we'll do that.
Yeah. And, of course, the by-election winner, Sarah Perkin, who won the Runcorn and Helsby by-election last week, is sworn in around about 20 minutes' time in Parliament. Must be a fairly surreal moment for any new MP to find yourself sitting there, by the speaker, putting your hand on the good book and swearing yourself into a system such as the mother of all parliaments. And, of course, it brings up Reform's MP count to 5. It would have been 6 had Mr Lowe not walked the plank, but nonetheless it changes it a little bit. I wouldn't normally pay too much attention to whether it's male or female, but I think in this case for Reform it's possibly quite helpful that the male pale stale allegation that gets thrown at them can be slightly alleviated with their new MP.
Yeah, I think smart on the part of Zia Youssef, I think, in selecting someone. I mean, she's obviously going to be a very good MP. She was, by all accounts, a very talented local councillor. But as you pointed out, you've lost Rupert Lowe, but now you've brought in this new woman as your MP. It's almost like saying that whole media fiasco that happened a few weeks ago doesn't matter. We've already moved past that. We've got a new MP. We've replenished the ranks. And I think that's probably the narrative that the party is going to want to hear repeated in the next couple of weeks.
Spot on. Number 10, and the winter fuel payment debacle continues. I think I speak for everyone. I used to use the example, David Cameron's mum probably shouldn't get the winter fuel allowance. And I think we all notionally at least agreed with, a millionaire or somebody on, 50,000 a year, whatever. However, so it wasn't the cutting of some people's fuel allowance, it was where they set the line that seemed to cause the trouble. So you had this extraordinary situation where some pensioners on about 11,500 a year were suddenly told, yeah, you no longer qualify. I mean, it couldn't have been set any lower.
I think it's the whole idea of the means testing. I mean, it's very complicated. And I think if you're an elderly person, to be told, don't worry, you will still keep your allowance. You've got to fill out, this 48-page online form, and there's no one you can call who will talk you through the process. I mean, that in and of itself is going to make people very upset and angry. And I think also, and this is something that actually Kemi Badenoch, I think, correctly pointed out about conversations she had on the doorstep. It's no good saying we're all having to tighten our belts. Everything's getting a bit more difficult for everyone, so we've got to find money from somewhere. When you're continuing to spend money on schemes that are extremely unpopular because you're unwilling to make concessions on that. So, of course, the one everyone brings up is immigration. We're spending how many £billions a year on maintaining the system of migrant hotels. It's those two things happening together. You can't say we're being fiscally responsible, but also it's too politically difficult to crack down on this one particular issue. So we're going to take, the money from your grandparents, keep them warm in the winter, but we're not going to address this long-standing political problem.
Yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? It's one thing doing it, but doing it against the backdrop of millions and millions being spent elsewhere is the bit that really sticks. And that's where there's a real sense that Labour have lost touch. The Tories are not much better. The only party that get it are Reform UK. And people can argue the rights and wrongs of that statement, but that's broadly the feeling that's out there, Poppy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a reason why the winter fuel allowance was the thing that really hurt the Labour Party. I mean, it happened very early on, and almost immediately you can see the polls. They just won this massive landslide majority. It's like it just falls off a cliff. It was an early indication of where the direction of travel would be.
Yeah.
That the promises that have been made, that we're not like the Tories, you know, we're going to do things differently, that was completely rubbish. It was the same thing that people have been experiencing for the last 14 years, and I think they were rightly punished for it.
Yeah. And also this story as well. Tory MPs, we are told, are to meet to discuss ousting Kemi Badenoch, quote, before it's too late. And now, these stories come around every now and again. I don't know how many Tory MPs. It could be just 2 of them. Who knows? But it seems there is a feeling after the Tories lost 15 councils and 674 seats to reform that something needs to be done. And sadly for Kemi Badenoch, it comes after she's had a couple of fairly good innings at the dispatch box for PMQs. There is a body of thought that Robert Jenrick should take up that helm. He's a bit more what the Tories need. The problem they have, of course, Poppy, is that firstly, there are people like Bob Jenrick who a lot of Reform UK voters might go, yeah, I quite like that guy. But there's also an awful lot of Tory voters who absolutely loathe Nigel Farage. So they're not that keen on that kind of the one nationers. It's not really the way they want their party to be. And I further wonder whether if Robert Jenrick was running the party, he'd just look a little bit like Nigel Farage light, and therefore, well, why vote for him? You might as well vote for the real deal. So their troubles are not over.
Yeah, well, you know, the problem with the Tories is the moment they get a bad result, the first thing they think of doing is regicide. Like, let's get rid of the leader.
Yeah,
you know, how many leaders have they had in the last 20 years?
507, apparently, yes.
Well, they've all had a go at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem for the Tories is, look, I think Robert Jenrick has shown himself to be a very capable politician. He's actually been almost like the unofficial leader of the opposition. Well, I completely agree with that. Kemi has maybe not been quite what a lot of people thought she would have been when they voted her to become party leader. Yeah. Totally understand. I don't think the problem is the person. I think it's the party. I don't think that the party can recover even half the level of support it used to have a couple of years ago, purely because they have almost discredited themselves. Yeah. They have never had this challenger party on the right before that's been so well organised. As you rightly point out, you've already got Farage. You know, I think just repeating the same things that Nigel Farage says with even less credibility, where people can turn around and say, why didn't you do that when you were in government? You know, what more can they do? I mean, I feel that Kemi Badenoch, yeah, she could be on the attack more. She could be showing her face more. She could be putting forward policies instead of saying, let's wait and see. But is that actually going to make a difference? I don't really know.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? There's a sort of I know we're 4 years away from an election, but there's a sense that a kind of tipping point has already been reached, and it's fairly irredeemable stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's good to have pressure of reform, because if they do get into government and they repeat the same mistakes of the last Conservative government, the same mistakes of the current Labour government, then we're in a really bad position. Yeah. But, you know, they're not really offering even that. I don't think you can say we understand issues are very complex and we don't want simple answers, when the whole country's going, actually, the problems are quite simple, and the answers should also be simple. You're just not willing to carry them out properly, and that's going to be the problem with them.
100%. Listen, Poppy, great to have you back on. Nice to speak. We will talk again. Poppy Coburn, assistant comment editor over there at The Telegraph. Thank you to her. We'll continue to take your calls on this one as well. A little bit of breaking news, by the way. The UK and the Indian government have agreed an quote, ambitious and mutually beneficial trade agreement, according to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We will get the details of that, I'm sure, in time. But that is certainly the headline, an ambitious and mutually beneficial trade agreement. What does that mean in practice? Details to come. One from Don in Chelmsford. I think a lot of people who've not worked in local government have little understanding how they operate. It's all about leadership and management, precise budgeting and a robust, compliant procedure, says Don. And again, it comes back, there's a lot of sort of repeat cliches going on here, but if they don't cock it up and they run it efficiently, bearing in mind, I can't imagine, even in Kent, which is the coalface of the immigration story in this country, of course, I can't imagine there's going to be sizable and obvious glaring things they could do where people go, wow, look, they solved the immigration problem. It's not going to pan out like that. But what they can do is be a hyper-efficient local authority. And if they're able to do that, and that becomes the talking point, wow, I didn't hear a Labour voter looking at that going, to be fair to them, they didn't muck it up. They did what they, yep. The Tories go, yeah, you know, they did a good job. If they can get that, they could be home and dry come 2029. Now, that seems a long way away. But back in July the 4th, local elections this May seemed a long way away. And here we are. They've been done and gone, and more to come. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Nigel Farage and Reform do not have to do anything at the moment other than not be Labour or the Tories. You know, all he has to do is not be Keir Starmer and not be Kenny Badenoch.
Right. Now, but also, I think what will also become a key battleground, of course, will be this business that was introduced by Zia Yusuf on Sunday and Laura Kunsberg and other shows, where he says, you know, we're going to actively challenge the reform councils where we are, particularly in Kent, which will be an interesting one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
June says in Stourbridge we had a major road closed where they actually put a footpath in the middle of nowhere. Honestly, what a waste instead of dealing with potholes. I know everybody... I always think of it this way. When you meet somebody who works in those departments, they will usually tell you a very different version of events. Go, no, it didn't happen like that. That's not what happened. We didn't just put a footpath that went to what we meant to do. There will always be some kind of like convoluted reason around it. And again, the cycle lane thing in Severn, I'm not against a cycle lane, for God's sake, of course not. But that doesn't mean to say that all cycle lanes are going to be beneficial and efficient, no more than all new road structures will be beneficial and efficient. And the one they've done in Sevenoaks is particularly bonkers. I mean, it's just absolute bloody nonsense what they've done. I have no idea what they were thinking about. But somebody voted that in. I don't know how much it cost, probably, you know, a couple of £100,000, I'm sure. It was a good 5-6 weeks work, tons of tailbacks while they did it, and when it was finished we all looked askance thinking, what the hell have they just done? What the heck is that? What the heck is that? That's where we're at. Nobody's really held account for any of that. Jay says, who on earth is saying Kemi has lurched to the right? The Tories are still just as left as Labour. They would need to go 2 steps right of reform to actually compete at an election. Yeah, I don't think... I mean, the truth is that the accusation that the Tories are a right-wing party only ever really came from Labour. Anybody that was looking at Conservatives, you know, the clue's in the name. It's about conserving basic values, if you like. There was nothing right-wing about it. And every time they did something that somebody thought was, oh, well, that's not fair on this 1 or 2 people, they were accused of being some sort of rabid right-wing party. That was largely a tag that came from those that never voted for them. I think the average Conservative never, you know, thought of themselves as being right-wing in any shape or form. And I think that point is now more obvious than ever before. That all the tags, the kind of right-wing tag that's used as a pejorative, as a term of abuse. Somebody texted me earlier that, what was it, Carol Codwalla? She used to be a Gardeninger. Is she still employed? I don't know. But making noises and, you know, crying like a baby at the fact that some mainstream newspapers are putting pictures of reform. And again, she called a far-right party, I think the reference was. She's the reason people are voting that way, and they just don't get it. They have this really bizarre, wonky notion of where the centre is or where the political appetite is, and it's usually so way off. It's nearly always so way off. It's hilarious. And yet you've always got groups of people in your little echo chamber that will hear, but broadly speaking, talking to ordinary men and women up and down this country, somebody like her and others have no idea where appetites are, where priorities are. They just don't know. They've never been in that position. Philippa is in Dorset. Philippa, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. I just wanted to talk about Reform UK and how they need to prove themselves.
Yeah.
As a former lifelong Labour voter, I am now a fully fledged paid-up member of Reform. I went to the Birmingham rally. I listened to what Lee Anderson, what Nigel was saying. I actually travelled all the way up to Runcorn, and I helped with the canvassing for Reform.
Wow.
And the only reason why I've done that is because I'm not watching mainstream media. I'm watching things like talkTV. I'm making my own informed decisions about politics now and what's happening. And what Reform need to do to prove themselves is basically get those policies out there, not just be talking about what they're going to do with immigration, but what they're going to be doing with the NHS, what they're going to be doing with the elderly and the welfare cuts to disability. All of those things, they need to make them authentic, they need to make them clear, they need to make people know what they're going to do both nationally and locally with all these councils they're now in charge of, and these new councillors. They will give these councillors all the training that they're required so they can do the job properly. I ran in the local elections, in Poole a few years ago for another party, and you know, you will get all the support you need, all the media training, all of those things. You know, it's just that Reform are a new party, and people, the electorate, need to make up their own minds, not by looking at the propaganda and saying that people who vote for Reform are racist. That's totally not true. What we're about is family values, about our country, about our heritage, about, you know, all those things that have been important to us since this country was established, and we need to get that back, and that's what's so important. I would love to see Nigel and Lee and Yusuf and all the others being interviewed properly in a documentary on Reform and on their politics, so they can actually share what they really, really stand for, without all the spin, without all the marketing, without all the propaganda, because that's what people really need to know, and more people need to watch and listen to talkTV.
There it is. 100% agree on all of that. Listen, Philippa, thank you. That's a great call as well. And not the first time I've heard somebody who's a Labour supporter. I think I told you about a fellow that was doing some plastering at my house, who was the Reform candidate for, wasn't Romford, it was one of the Essex seats. Didn't quite do it, but he was, you know, he did well. He got he hoovered up some votes there, but he was an old lefty. That was his original politics. He was the sort of Tony Benn kind of lefty. I think a lot of people were of that school of thought. And there is, do you remember when Donald Trump and who was what was the name of the who was the independent guy in America that was standing against Trump, and the old boy, when Biden was around, what was his name? He was hoping to be the Democratic candidate for a while, I think, whose name has completely escaped me, and people are going to be texting in like there's no tomorrow. And him, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. And he was a bit of an arch lefty, and of course, Trump was anything but. But they had a weird, the horseshoe provided a weird commonality in these two guys. They were fiercely against, was it Larry somebody? Fiercely against kind of the globalisation of the world. They both felt that was an iffy territory to be on. So they had a bit more in common than you might imagine, that kind of left versus right. This is Ian in Bridgend. Ian, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Oh, hello, Ian. Yes, just briefly, what I'm hoping Reform will do is similar to, as you're saying about Trump there.
Yeah.
Dode went in and they exposed US aid, wasn't it? You look at all these charities here in Wales, I think there's more money given to climate change charities than the NHS gets. You know, it's
I'm sure that's true.
You know? It's crazy, isn't it? I hope they do that as a first phase. They expose all this stupid expenditure, and of course, it's an industry in itself. Members related to councillors and so on getting jobs then in these charities. It's one big scam. So if they can expose that, and then as a second phase, then go on to actually deliver priorities important to the people, rather than their mates in the climate change and DEI sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you sense, I mean, obviously there are some limitations with what you can do as a county councillor, but I guess you can set the mood music, right, Ian?
That's right, yes. Interesting looking at the news here in Wales today. Eluned Morgan's already trying to distance herself from Starmer. All of a sudden, she sees the threat from Reform, and she's trying to reinvent herself now as a new Welsh Labour Party, completely separate. But they're even worse than the UK government, and hopefully it's going to be a futile exercise on her part, and Reform will really clean up here in Wales.
There it is. Ian, thank you very much, and it's going to be interesting. Bernie Sanders, that was the guy. Bernie Sanders. Remember Bernie Sanders? Yeah, you remember him. Even Finn remembers Bernie Sanders, and he's like 11. So, yeah. That bloke, yes. So many people now tweeting and going, it's Bernie Sanders. Him, yeah. I don't know whether... But did Bernie Sanders' brother stand against David Cameron in this country, or something bizarre like that? Mike says, trust can only be built whilst in power. That is why they will succeed, because they cannot trust the Tories or Labour, as proven. That's why Reform will succeed. We will watch with interest. Thank you for that, Mike. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk. This comes from Michael, who says, if you look at some council budgets, they do receive loads of taxpayers' cash. It's how they choose to spend it that is the problem. All Reform has to do is fill potholes, empty bins, ban migrant hotels, ban parking charges in towns, and bring back local issues instead of me walking past town halls with free Palestine posters everywhere. Says, yeah, I think that might be a start. Mick, thank you very much indeed. But how curtailed are they? What can they literally do? Certainly in obvious areas like bins, but then, of course, they have all the local authorities that are under their brief as well. Every borough council that you get in any county, and they might be of different political colours. In fact, they're most likely to almost all be of different political colours. There will be problems, perhaps some issues around that as well. Now, Britain is updating 20-year-old warplanes over fears a Russian missile, nuclear or cyber attack could happen. Defence officials say vital infrastructures exposed to hypersonic weapons as MI5 reports a 48% rise in state-backed threats. It comes as 5 Iranian men have been arrested over a suspected terror plot in London at the weekend, with more than 20 Iran-linked plots foiled since 2022. Let's speak to Hugh Andre. He's ex-British Army captain. Good afternoon to you, Hugh. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Very good. I mean, should I be worried here? Is this time to build a bunker in the back garden like they told us in the 1980s?
No, I don't think so. It's nothing new. Obviously, I'm not serving anymore, but in my, everyday life, I'm in contact with those who are serving and those who've recently left. But I think, we should always live by the principle, in times of peace, prepare for war. And I think that the Prime Minister has clearly been briefed by people who know what they're talking about. It's not news that our armed forces have consistently dwindled in size, certainly since I've left. Yeah. And it was happening as I joined a long time ago. Right. But I think, I was a Soviet doctrine, tactics, equipment specialist whilst I was serving. And I was shocked to see at the start of the Ukraine war all the same kit and equipment, to be frank, being used that I studied all those years ago. Yeah. But I do think we need to be ready. Attacks on our certainly on our technology systems and various platforms are continually ongoing, and have done. There was a very sizable attack last year. And so we have to be prepared, but we need to invest. We need to invest into our armed forces. I mean, thankfully for this country, we have a professional military. The Soviets is conscription-based. We have the best training pamphlets. We have probably the best trained military personnel in the world. Even the Americans are envious of our training pamphlets. And let's not forget that every year 20,000 leave the military. Yeah. And myself included, for the first 10 years after service, you remain on the active service list.
How do we get more people to join up? I mean, is it? I don't want to say as simple as that, but I mean, it's in that ballpark, isn't it? We just need more military personnel.
Yes, we do. And that's a really interesting question, Ian, because, as you know, myself and my team are about to launch WeServed, which is a marketplace. Think Amazon with an Amazon Prime for the 5.1 million veterans and their families across the UK. And what does it do? It offers jobs, training. Yeah. It offers them access to housing and accommodation, to healthcare, rewards, benefits, and it provides them with a secure and trusted community sort of social media platform which they can all communicate. Now, why do I say that? The single biggest problem at the moment for our military, and specifically in the army, is that they don't know where their 20 to 40-year-olds are, which is a bit worrying. Because if people want to get called up tomorrow, whether you're in the Guards or the infantry or the Royal Engineers, you're going to want to call on those who've left in the last 10 years. But our Ministry of Defence doesn't know where they are. The regiments don't know where they are, because they don't have the investment. They don't have the resource. You know, it tends to be someone's wife who, out the goodness of her heart, sort of mans the office and sends out a monthly letter. So what we're doing at this very moment is designing a product which, no surprise to you, will be TikTok, Instagram focused.
Of course.
To access the 20 to 40-year-olds. Because, you know, I hate to say it, but I visited a couple of headquarters recently and met with individuals responsible for all their old soldiers, well, let's say sailors, airmen and women as well, and they didn't even know how to use Facebook. So
yeah, we're in different types, but we
communicate and access and get them in, and that leads me to my final point. In the sooner we start looking after our veterans, the sooner we make this country the best country in the world to be a veteran, the sooner my daughters, your son, your daughter, whomever, will go, actually, I'll join the armed forces because I know I'll be looked after when I leave.
Yeah. And that's a very good point, isn't it? Until we have that kind of sense, that sort of reassurance. Listen, Hugh, lovely to have you on. We will speak again, I'm sure, on this very point. Hugh Andre, CEO of We Served, an ex-British Army captain. What happened to a desire to join the armed forces? I mean, bearing in mind, there is a whole career opportunity that is there. And is it, as Hugh just alluded to there, is it the legacy after you've been in, where you come out and sense, back on Civvy Street, there's a real sense of, I don't know what to do. I've been in an institution where life has been very different, like nothing else, for 20 years, and suddenly you're out and you don't feel looked after. But as he said, you've got to get it to a point where people do feel looked after, where they get that sense. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to go to the Army Career Centre, send off for literature from the RAF and the Navy, just almost for the hell of it. But there was still an interest, and a couple of people took it up. There was one guy who was my best mate at the first part of secondary school, joined the RAF, ended up flying a Red Arrow, for goodness sake. I did rather well. Another mate, I remember joining the Army. I don't think that's there anymore. What specifically changed that? And of course, I know it's a cliche, but you can find yourself going all over the world in this job. I mean, it can be an incredible experience, and you've got a certain, a certain stability that in many jobs you certainly wouldn't get. Let's go to Chris in Epsom. Chris, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, I don't want to talk about the military thing today.
Yep.
What I want to talk about is, as you put it, Reform's glorious wins last week.
Yeah.
Now there's a problem. 10 major councils.
Yeah.
That glorious win can be a poison chalice if they're not careful.
Yeah.
I know Nigel's a very, very smart political mover. I'm sure that he's got it nailed down. But here's from some experience of mergers and acquisitions and hostile takeovers, all right? And I've watched Yesminster, all episodes at least once. What they're going to need to know is, first of all, metaphorically, they need to be putting on stab jackets because everybody's going to be aiming for them.
Yeah.
Secondly, they should issue a moratorium. It should have gone out 8 o'clock this morning in the 10 councils they control. No contracts to be signed. Everything ceases. No signatures on paper from this moment forward. Then they look at the contracts that are being negotiated at the moment, and they go through them, and they pull in people that they trust to go through the contracts. Because it might be a build contract, a road contract, a haulage contract, a schools contract. It could be the whole gamut of what local councils do, and they need to go through them carefully.
Yeah.
Then they need to sign them off, and then they need to look at all of their staff that are in there. I would call them every single person, every head of department, then the people in the department. I'd call them for an interview, and I'd interview them and find out where their head's at. They don't need to be reform voters. What they need to do is they need to have their heart in the district. That's what they need to discover. Then they need to run tight controls. The one thing that is very, very obvious to me from experience with local council tips. Have you ever seen so much fly tipping, Ian, as we've got these days?
All over the place, right?
Yeah, you know why? Because the councils now, some councils, you have to go online and book a time slot.
I did it literally, Chris. I did it this weekend, and it was. They finally updated their website in my neck of the woods, because before you had to fill out the form every single time from scratch. Yeah. Your car, your model, where you live, are you bringing any kind of building stuff, blah, blah, blah. You had to do this every time. You couldn't save the information. They've slightly changed that. But, yeah, you've got to do that. The council guy told me at the tip that apparently punters prefer that. I can't believe it.
Yeah, absolute rubbish. Right, what they need to do, all right?
Yep.
Because what's happening is they're restricting when you can and can't go to the recycling unit, as they call it.
Yeah.
They will not let, or they question a lot of stuff that's going there. Wood, for instance, that can be recycled. They question, that could be commercial. You could have just removed that from your kitchen. You can't take that here. Now, I had this, right? This is a nonsense. I actually loaded when my father died 2 years ago, I promised him I'd get rid of an old shed that was a bit dilapidated in the bottom of the garden because he was worried about it collapsing. So took it down, put it in a van. I bought a van licence online, right? Went to the tip, and he said, "What have you got?" I said, "I've got an old shed." He said, "Oh no, you can't bring that in. That's commercial." I said, "Well, I've bought a van licence." He said, "No," he said, "because the van's commercial." I said, "Well, I've got a nice car. I'm not going to put all this in a nice car." He said, "Well, that's the only way we can take it and put it in a nice car." So I said, "Okay,
that's nonsense.
Let me through to the other side there, and I'll go down the commercial and I'll pay to tip it." "Oh no, you can't do that. You haven't got a commercial carrier's license."
Oh, for God's sake!
I said, "You're joking, right?" I went through the guy on the gate, his manager, and then I got hold of one of the heads of department. In the end, Ian, right, after this massive row, I got dispensation for 2 loads coming on my van because I wouldn't let it go. But it's ridiculous. That would happen to people, and they go and fly tip it. Also, they should just allow, if people, right, it's not beyond the realms of a half intelligent man. If a van keeps turning up with rubbish, he's commercial.
Correct. He's trying it on. That's what he does for a living. He's a builder trying to, find a shortcut way financially to get rid of stuff. I get that, but
the money that they're spending on having to clean up fly tipping, right? Is I would imagine it's 50 times what it would cost to employ more people, to have the cycling centre open 7 days a week, to let anybody come in, all right, and put an ANPR camera there, and if it's the same van that's coming in time and time again,
you can clock it straight away. Listen, Chris, I have to move for no other reason than time. Great call as ever. Thank you, Chris in Epsom. Reg says, leave Kemi alone. She's doing a great job. She's the best female leader of the Tory party since Thatcher. Well, I mean, that wasn't reflected in last week's result, I guess. Dan's in Warrington on this sort of very point of Kemi and the Conservatives. What have you got, Dan?
Hello, Ian. I don't think Kemi's the problem. It's the Conservatives cannot be trusted ever again. I mean, I'm an ex-Conservative voter, now Reform, and they cannot be trusted on the big issues. They had so long, 14 years was it, in power, and they've made up all the excuses. Mass immigration and crime are the 2 big problems, and the big parties don't want to talk about that. They're the 2 things they don't want to talk about, but that's what everybody's talking about in the street, isn't it? And they refuse to talk about it. They've lied about everything as well, for 14 years, and they can't be treated. This isn't Kemi's fault, really. It's just sort of passing the buck if they get rid of her for somebody else.
I agree. I don't think it would have mattered. And the trouble is, if they got Robert Jenrick in there, Dan, as I said earlier, he's just going to look like a kind of pale version of, I don't mean literally a skin tone, I mean a paler version of Nigel Farage.
Yeah, exactly. You know, people have just had enough. I think that people are actually angry about the way politics is, because they were almost like they were heading towards a car crash, weren't they, Conservatives? They knew it was coming, but they weren't prepared to change anything. They had a majority in Parliament, so they could have changed the laws to suit themselves to change things, but they didn't. And then Labour have got in, and they're even worse. So, I think that people like myself are turning to Reform because they're the only party that's actually saying what they are going to do. And they might not be telling the truth. We don't know this.
I think they're telling the truth. They may, like any party, stumble across areas where they either can't do something they thought they could, or they can do it, but it's going to take a ridiculous amount of time for it to become evident. There could be, until people feel that there is change. It could be that. Listen, Dan, thank you. Where there is a will, there is a way. It's a great call. 0344 499 1000. More from you coming next on Talk.
Nigel Farage and Reform do not have to do anything at the moment other than not be Labour or the Tories. You know, all he has to do is not be Keir Starmer and not be Kenny Badenoch.
Right. Now, but also, I think what will also become a key battleground, of course, will be this business that was introduced by Zia Yusuf on Sunday and Laura Kunzberg and other shows, where he says, you know, we're going to actively challenge the reform councils where we are, particularly in Kent, which will be an interesting one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Zara says, Reform don't have any plans, they are a protest party. Well, I think Reform would probably say, we now run 10 councils. We've got literally hundreds of councillors. We've got 5 MPs. Far more than the Green Party in both of those respects. Would we write all of the other parties, the Lib Dems, who came second best to Reform last week. Are they a protest party? I don't know. You could apply that same sort of fairly lazy accusation if you wanted to at anybody. Just before we go back to the phones, it's time for the Voice of Doom. It's day 2 of this one. Day 2 of the political mystery voice bit. One question for you. Who is this?
This is so interesting.
It's short and sweet, but if you know who it is, have another listen.
This is so interesting.
Don't phone, but you can message if you fancy having a crack. 87222 is the number. If we get a right answer right after the news headlines, we will tell you who it is. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
This is so interesting.
87222. Back on the phones, Andrew in Hertfordshire. What have you got for us, Andrew?
Good afternoon. I hope you had a great break at the weekend.
It was very nice, thank you.
Yeah, look, everybody's negative about the whole reform thing.
Yes.
People, because they want them to fail. But this is interesting in that they are disruptive. In our particular area, we have a lot of travellers, and many of them are taken to school. In a family of 1, 2, 3 or 4, many of them have carers. So if you have a household of, say, 3 children, they have 3 cabs and 3 carers twice a day, once to school and once back. That's 6 people paid. That's 5 6s are 30 instances a week, which is 120. All Reform have to do is, when you look at your council tax bill, and I urge you to get yours out and just and you can publish it online. Now they're big, bold statements: fire, roads. If you look at the way it's broken up, it never gives you any detail. And if you look at the Mayor of London, when he got in, Khan, all he did was disrupt things by go to places and cause problems. And look at Heathrow. It's expanding. He's taking them to court. All Reform are going to do is show people what they thought to be true. If you take someone like the great big fat Liberal Democrat MP who was a child abuser, we all knew that.
Cyril Smith,
but society refused to accept it. And so what you get, we know we're wasting money, we don't know where. And all Reform are going to do to be successful, they just have to identify one item a week and bring it to the attention of the public, and the public will go, that's good. And then if you take Wales, which is a basket case at the moment, people in Wales can't vote Conservative, have to vote Labour. But if they realise that Reform could make their life better, they're home and hosed. So
that's it. But it's getting that realisation to a wider audience. Because although this was impressive for them on Thursday, it doesn't get anywhere near making it a national event, right?
Yeah, but if the hole's outside Rod Stewart's home, he knows they're not being filled. He publicised it. But if they expose that a friend of theirs, through family, has had the contract and actually they're paying over the odds for it, people then start to identify and see things that they knew were wrong.
If they can find a good, healthy list like that, then you're absolutely right. They would be home and dry. Listen, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for that. Bit of a conspiracy theory going around the internet as well. Have you seen this? That Donald Trump is actually secretly creating more renewables around the world than any other leader. And you've got 2 examples. You've got Australia, you've got Canada. There was a shock win in Australia at the weekend. Adam, how shocked were you? Scale of 1 to 10? 5. That's why Adam lives here and not in Australia. But yeah, so Albanese is back and he's built back better, to coin a phrase. And apparently there's going to be a rapid shift on renewable energy down under. Meanwhile, in Canada, what's that character called? Carney, isn't it? Mark Carney. Similar thing there. So these are sort of anti-Trump vibes that are going on. So governments that oppose Trump are more likely to be very, very evangelical about climate change and all the renewable energies that go with it. So is Trump inadvertently a global plot? Stick him there and then the rest of the world will go mad and they'll start going all climate-y and green, and then we'll get it kind of done by the back door. And then America will go, wow, we've got to join in now. True or false? Peter is in Luton. Peter, what have you got for us?
Yeah, hi, Ian. On the Reform, what they can look into.
Yes.
You remember the banking crash about 10 years ago in Iceland, wasn't it? Where a number of councils had invested, or a person, or let's say an investment guru, they may think was a guru, in each council invested millions in this bank. in system. Do you recall it?
Yes, I do. Yeah, absolutely. There was, in fact, I think there was more than one council that had money in it, right?
Right. There was quite a number.
Yeah.
But the general public weren't aware of it.
No, it didn't make massive headlines. I've got a feeling Kent County Council might have had a few quid in there too.
Millions. They had millions.
Yeah.
And I expected the media to erupt at the time. I mean, was not so much your shows as such, because they weren't around.
No, true.
But the papers or anything like this. But nothing. Virtually nothing came out. Well, it didn't get the coverage.
Is that because at the time of the investment it was seen as a really good investment and it went wrong? Like all investments, they can go down as well as up.
Yeah, but who gave this person the mandate to invest all this money in the council in the first place?
Yeah, good point.
And is it still going on?
It'd be interesting, and now that Reform can see the books, at least on 10 councils, it'll be fascinating to see where that money is invested, because that's perhaps one area they can have a level of control of. Listen, Peter, thank you very much indeed for that. Peter in Luton. Amanda says all Reform UK have to do is prove themselves to do what they say they will do, unlike other parties one could mention. The only problem they're going to stumble across, there might be some Reform voters, I think most people are savvy enough, who literally think that some of the national stuff they would do if they were in government, somehow they can do in local government. And of course they can't. They might have a kind of casual nod to some of it, but you're not going to be changing seismic policy. But they can set mood music and they can set narratives, and they can do it, certainly in Parliament, the 5 MPs, they can do it with a bit more confidence than before, because of the support they've had locally. There's a certain legitimacy that's been given to them now, and a represent. You know, it was often seen as somebody earlier said, fairly lazy analysis, and it was a bit of a protest vote. It's a protest vote. Well, that's some protest vote, right? There's a lot going. It's a protest party. There's a lot going on there, so it does give them that. They can set the parameters, and as long as they don't cock it up, then they could be, I hate to use the phrase, but could be home and dry. Coming up in the next section, more from you. Loads of comment on the big subjects, particularly that question, what do Reform UK now need to do to prove themselves? Have you voted for them? I'm sure you'd now like to see some kind of manifestation of what you voted for. Thoughts on that? And, of course, the voice of doom. Will we get a winner? It's day 2. Here's the voice.
This is so interesting.
Who's that? 87222 if you think you know. Hopefully we get a right answer, and we'll tell you after the news at 3.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Reform UK will set out detailed policy for the mass immigration of illegal immigrants from Britain. They're putting meat on the bones as the party seeks to build on its local election success and, of course, that Runcorn and Helsby by-election victory. But how else can the party prove itself? What have they got to do to prove to you that your vote was worth it? How much can they do at a local level? We'll continue to take your calls and comments on that. Also this afternoon, as Britain marks 80 years since VE Day, concerns are growing about how little many young people know about the war and can identify with its significance. This isn't something you want to really lose from the minds of any future generation, bearing in mind the commitment and the utter sacrifice that was made all those years ago. Details coming next, and Labour risks taxing high streets out of existence. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been warned with claims her policies are harming jobs and forcing more shops and restaurants to close. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Just before we move on and talk about VE Day, let's do the Voice of Doom. Have we got a winner for the Voice of Doom? Remember, this is the mystery voice for the uninitiated. Every day about 2:45 we play. It's always a political voice. Could be a politician, could be somebody connected, obviously connected with politics. They could be past or present. This is the voice.
This is so interesting.
Well, let's hear that again.
This is so interesting.
It really does sound like Matt Hancock, and a lot of people have said Matt Hancock, but it's not Matt Hancock. I think I'm going to have to say that every day now. It's not Matt Hancock. It's not Rishi Sunak. It's not Lord Toby Young, nor is it Robert Jenrick. Nigel Farage, clearly not Nigel Farage. Zia Youssef, it is not. Lord Craig McKinley, it is not. We haven't got a winner, which means it rolls over again. Remember, the last one we did rolled over for 21 days. So rolled over was it? I think Ofcom are having an investigation into how this happened. This one rolls over for day 3 tomorrow. Now, as Britain marks 80 years since VE Day, concerns are rising over the lack of knowledge among young people about the war. Some educators warn the country is losing touch with key moments in its military history as younger generations struggle to identify them. It comes as Chair of Reform UK says young people need a sense of pride about the UK, and his party's mission would be to remoralise young people. Nationwide events are taking place this week to honour Allied victory in Europe and those who served. Let's speak with Hugh Strawn, British military historian. Hugh, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
Nice to have you with us. I know we can all put the old rose-tinted glasses on, but when I was watching yesterday and listening to some of those former military personnel talking, the level of dignity, the sacrifice that was made, etc., I did feel I was looking at a generation, a group of people whose values and whose sense of national pride was almost a thing of the past. I was resisting thinking that because I thought, well, we should continue with this. But there is a sense, and it's borne out in a lot of the research into young people, that maybe future generations, even the current generations, just aren't really on board with what went before them.
Well, I think that almost certainly is true, and the polling is suggesting it. And as a historian, far be it from me to discourage the idea that people should engage with military history. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But equally, I'm not that surprised. If you think of this in terms, for example, of the 1970s, when there was a sense, for example, that people were not attending Remembrance Sunday, that might die a death, the further away we got from the 2 world wars. And you look at the take-up now, when there may be this lack of comprehension, but there is a greater engagement than there was in the late 70s. I served on the UK Committee for the Centenary of the First World War, and one of the issues we faced in 2014, beg your pardon, I'm not quite that old, in 2014, was that people had no real conception of the First World War at all. They thought this football match had happened on Christmas Day. They had no idea where it began, and so on and so forth. And one of the benefits of the centenary was that people were educated, people engaged. And indeed, the longer the centenary went on, the more people engaged. And I think one of the challenges that VE Day has had is that it's been dropped in as an 80th anniversary. We don't normally celebrate or commemorate VE Day. We focus on the 11th of November because the decision was taken after the Second World War that we would concentrate the commemoration of both World Wars on that day or on the nearest day to it, Remembrance Sunday. And that means that VE Day has figured from time to time. It's even been disputed when it has been, I think when Tony Blair thought we should do something about it. People point out, of course, that the war did not end for everybody until VJ Day.
Yeah. And
that, is still a long way away from where we are now. It's a full 3 months away. So I'm not surprised that a generation for whom the Second World War is distant should not be immediately engaged. There's really nothing to remind them that they should be engaged. Yeah. And I would see that potentially, because we will get to the centenary of the Second World War in 2039 to 2045, that will be the moment when actually there'll be all sorts of things going on in museums, at school level, linking generations. I think the most surprising thing for me about the centenary of the First World War was that children came back from school and asked their parents what they knew of their family's engagement in the First World War. And parents didn't know because they were, if you like, the Generation Z of 10 years ago. And they will have to engage, and in engaging, it'll become a family process of engagement, quite apart from whatever happens within schools and so on. So I think that this is a cyclical issue rather than a sort of permanent issue. The permanent issue, of course, is that the last of the survivors of 1945 will not be with us for very much longer.
And that is a profound reality, of course. And I suppose, and you alluded to it in your response there, the ask your parent or your grandparents point naturally will be, I could just about ask my mum and dad about their memories. They were children during the sort of Second World War. So they remembered some of it. My mum's school was bombed in Kent, and all these kind of stories. And my nan, my grandmother, I could ask her questions, but that, of course, my kids can't ask me any questions about any of that stuff, and they have no grandparents that could really answer that question either. So I suppose that's a fairly significant part of this, isn't it? Because these stories were generally passed down.
Absolutely, and it's the readiness, of course, of young people to listen to old people bang on, and how much they're ready to do that. Yeah. But I think, actually, the image that you're just showing right now, which is the Ukrainian contingent with the Ukraine flag marching past the cenotaph, that actually seems to me the point of departure for engaging the younger generation. That's the war that's going on in Europe today. Yeah. And that's the war that connects us to the large major war in Europe. If major war is what we're looking at and its consequences, then to go in through a level where you're actually educating the young about the challenges of contemporary politics and strategy seems to be a great way in.
Yeah, I was about to say, actually, Ukraine, obviously, this is war on European soil, and that is, clearly significant and would be we say it a lot on this programme, the last time something like this happened, and we use that as an analogy for what went before. And I suppose maybe there are more kids, younger kids, perhaps getting a taster through Educa. I'd like to think that history lessons do, even among, younger kids, that they can at least touch on the fact that why it's important to resist, in this case, Russia, considering what happened before when we were trying to resist Germany, etc. To make that analogy, I'd say, is a fairly simple thing for kids to understand.
Absolutely. And the question, of course, also is how much space is there in the curriculum, and how is the curriculum devised in ways that actually make this possible? There would, I think it's a broad generalization that although actually, in my experience, the young are engaged by the study of war, however awful the subject may be. And that certainly at university level, military history in this country is riding comparatively high. The challenge is it's quite hard to put in the curriculum. And that is partly because the way that most curriculums are divided. Remember, we have no national curriculum. We're not like France that says you will teach the following subjects and it's centrally done. We have essentially a market in what is taught. That what is then taught tends to be specific topics, specific areas. The standard criticism for a long time has been that it was about Hitler and the Nazis, but it tends to be about the advent of the Nazi Party to power, possibly the causation of the war, and possibly the Holocaust as a consequence of the war. But it isn't much about the war itself. And that is just, if you like, a product of this approach to the curriculum, which doesn't look at history, if you like, in a sequential way, where one thing leads to another, but tends to look at particular aspects which may well provide insight on particular topics for people who are not actually going to be historians. Indeed. I think it can leave the young without a sense of context, without the sense that indeed the rise of the Nazi Party itself is a trigger for war, and that therefore should be the next thing after. But then have you got time in a crowded curriculum where everybody is competing for space?
It's an interesting point, and one I'm sure we will visit again. Hugh, listen, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate you being on. Hugh Strawn, who's a British military historian. Is there a cut-off point in kind of commemorations, anniversaries, etc.? As Hugh said, 1939 or 2039 will be a significant date. 2045 will be significant. That's the 100-year mark. Will that be the point where after that things take perhaps a more, I was about to say a dignified backseat? I don't know how, in terms of what you teach kids. There's lots and lots of different wars, clearly no world wars in this sense, that have gone on in the meantime, and we'll find ourselves in a place where we discover that there have been more casualties of war than there were in the Great Wars since then. All these sort of statistics might just dilute the level of reason why you think it should be kept fully on the front burner. I feel quite strongly about this. I cannot get my head around the idea that when, particularly with the First World War, and you read stories of kids who sort of faked their age, so they were 15 or something, and they were going, and I think 15, that's like 48 months older than my son. 15, and they went and sat in trenches with a greater chance than not that they weren't going to come back. And whether they were shot by the enemy or whether they died because of the brutal conditions and what they had to endure, extraordinary. So that the mentality and the change in mentality, and I think, to me, the interesting legacy of all this, when I was watching some of those characters and people that were around, or even the sort of older sons or daughters of people that were around who had very graphic memories, far graphic, more graphic than I might have had talking to my mum or nan. When you listen to that generation, I suppose what happened, and this goes into a whole different territory, but it brings us back to where we are with some of the other subjects we often talk about here, about the loss of values or the loss of Britishness or that sense of community or that sense of, there being a bit of a roadmap and we all kind of sing from it. And that's largely because of what happened during the war and after the war and post-war and what was happening. The NHS began, the council house building, Macmillan building social housing through the roof and achieving it. So for decades, there was that sense of everybody was in the same place, more or less. Everyone was singing from a similar hymn sheet with very similar experiences. Everyone knew somebody very, very close that just a few years ago had gone off to fight. Some came back, some didn't. There was a commonality, a binding that was absolutely glaring in British society. But of course, as the years have gone on, I suppose we lose that. So our sense of what was once kind of the thing that stitched the country together has sort of lost not just because of policy or wacky governments and bonkers decisions, but perhaps just time has moved things away. That closeness and sense of togetherness that everyone had post-war just simply doesn't exist anymore, and you can't get that back. There's no way to get that back. You have to sort of look for another way. That doesn't explain fully, by the way, why the French are still so darn proud to be French, and something we don't have in quite the same way in this country. Don't go away, Robert. Going to with you in a second. Robert in Hertfordshire with us in a moment. This comes in from Nigel, who says, in our street, the council just repainted the double yellows through the potholes. Go Cambridgeshire, says Nigel. Yeah, that kind of malarkey going on. Olive says, so Labour just haven't got it. The answer to the bad results is go further and faster in our changes. No, we don't want that, says Olive. I think that's fair enough as well. And this one from Nigel Brown, who says, Ian, it's not the leader of the Tory party that's the problem with the Tory party. Talk have spelled this out to them, as have many others. They ain't listening. They won't recover from what they did to this country. We'll have more on the way in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
You know, there's an important point about justice being seen to be done. And I think the major problem we have with the immigration tribunals at the moment is that justice is rarely seen to be done. We see all these crazy-looking decisions coming out of the tribunal, and anyone who wants to understand them has to read through a 40-page case decision. It shouldn't be this complicated. We have spent the last sort of 4 or 5 decades wrapping this issue up, or issues around asylum and immigration, in lots and lots of really complicated law.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000 with Robert in just a second. Reform UK's Sarah Pochin has taken her seat as an MP in the House of Commons. She was sworn in earlier this afternoon. She entered the House of Commons flanked by Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson, swearing that oath to the King. Here it is.
By Almighty God, that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
And there it is, and away she goes to sign the official documentation just against the shadow of the Speaker's chair. A couple of government ministers, Wes Streeting, was sitting on the front bench when that all happened. I thought Wes might put out a hand of congratulations, but apparently not today. So that is Reform's new MP, Sarah Pochin, taking her seat as the MP, the latest MP for Runcorn and Helsby after that by-election result last Thursday. Over to your calls. Robert in Hertfordshire. Robert, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you very much.
Good.
I mean, a little bit spurred on after watching The Darkest Hour last night.
Did you? There you go.
Well, it could have come from, I'm 73, so I was brought up at the 8 years after the war, but I was brought up in Clerkenwell where it was just one big bomb ruin. You could stand on the corner of Old Street and the Barbican wasn't there. There was nothing there. You could see all the way through to St Paul's. And then the rebuilding took years and years, and I was brought up with the war films, and so I was sort of involved, although I was, it took London a long time to recover from the war, and as well as the rest of the country. But there's a big difference between World War II and now. We've got people in this country who hate us. We've got people in this... Now, I don't think... I listened to that speaker, the last speaker you read on, but the reason our children are not educated is on purpose. I'll tell you that now. I mean, my son's 40... He's coming up for 45. There's still things that I have to tell him about the war that he don't know. It's just not... He's not told. We've got a London mayor who hates this country. We've got people who want to tear down our statues. We need to get out. Look, we're an island. It's about time we started acting like that. We're an independent island, thanks to Brexit. It's about time we started acting like an island.
How do that sense of, I don't know, if you were I often wonder if you were writing a fictitious story about planet Earth, and you put we started out as cavemen, and then we did X, Y, and Z, and then we started engineering things, and the Industrial Revolution, and then we had some wars and all the rest of it. I mean, at some point in that book, Robert, things would change, right? Even though we romanticise about the past a little bit, things would change, things would look a bit different. There's no way everyone would just remain in all their own countries around the world. We'd all have a little bit of moving around, yeah?
Yeah, but I think our greatest enemy over the last few years is woke. It stops us from... I think it's now wearing off a little bit now. But it stopped us doing everything. Ridiculous. If you didn't agree with the left, then you was right. No, I'm not right. I'm just an ordinary working Joe who pays me bills, went to work. I'm retired now, but I'm being labelled that I'm right-wing because I own my own house.
But what happens is that on the left and the right, because we live in this sort of divided world, that I suppose social media plays its part, Robert, you end up with... people who are just on the left or just on the right are not really extremists. They just have a view that life should be this way or that way. But what it does mean is that you then get the fringes of extremists. So you have the absolute left-wing nutbags on the left, and then you have the right-wing nutbags on the right. And, Reform have identified them and say we don't want anything to do with those guys. And, certainly Keir Starmer says publicly that they've identified the sort of mad... left-wing fringe of the party, and they don't want anything to do with them either.
Well, I sort of agree with that, but the thing is that the left, look, it's Marxism. You've got the lecturers in universities and teachers, and it's Marxism. That's the greatest thing. I don't care what you can call it left-wing, but it's Marxism. And they are infecting our students. Have they always been there? There's always been a bloke with, a big beard and a corduroy jacket who's able to convince you that somehow Stalin was quite a good bloke. Well, yeah, but this is a little bit different. I mean, they're tearing down statues. They're eradicating our history.
You can't eradicate history, even if some of it's pretty darn ugly. I mean, show me a country anywhere in the world that hasn't got a few shady parts of history. Goodness me. I mean, it's everywhere. But, of course, the whole point of history is that you learn from the story and you move forward and mistakes aren't made again. You also have to look at some really uncomfortable parts. Like war, for example. People die in war in big numbers, but often something good comes of the war, bizarrely.
Look, why did we get into the Second World War? Because another country was invaded by Germany. Nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us. Germany invaded Poland, and we warned them. They called our bluff, and it was nothing to do with us. I don't agree with us putting our head above the wall with Russia and Ukraine. I don't believe in this war, the coalition of the willing. No, I should call it the coalition of the some are more willing than others. Starmer is all of a sudden he's strutting about like a statesman, and that's thanks to Brexit. He can thank Brexit for that, because if we were still in the EU, he wouldn't be able to say anything without asking their permission first. So he's strutting about and that is all thanks to Brexit. He's
Yeah, that's a great example of the autonomy has meant that you can sing and impart your ideas in a very independent manner of the other 28 leaders in the EU. Listen, Robert, I've got to move for no other reason than time. I know I always say that just to be polite, let you know why I'm moving on. Ricky's in Ipswich. Ricky, what have you got for us? Hello.
Hello, Ian. How you doing? Yeah,
I'm very good.
I was just listening to that show, your last caller, and completely agree with what he said, actually, especially with the Europe thing. I personally think with the whole Europe thing, they won't let us sort of leave, to be honest. Some sort of deal was struck under the table saying that we'll let you leave, but you're going to have to have a load of migrants come over, and it's not going to stop, regardless of who's in power, unfortunately. And it's quite frightening, really. But what I was going to say regarding the winter fuel allowance is, don't the migrants get paid? Don't they get given money when they come to the country?
You get a small... Well, when you're staying in one of the hotels, you mean?
Yeah, I heard that they get given maybe £30-40, like gift card almost.
Yeah, I thought it was about £35-39, so I think you're right about that.
Yeah, so if you sort of like add all that up, so they get like, say they get £30 a week.
Yeah.
Add that up into weeks, into months, into years, you're going on to almost over £1,000 a year, possibly.
Oh, a lot,
No one knows
you're talking a lot of money.
No one knows how long they're going to be here for.
Yeah.
And we're taking away a measly £300 away from each OAP. When we're giving, like, say, £30 a week to all these people, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If we're going,
well, none of it makes sense, though, does it? None of it. In all the, the whole discussion about channel migration, Boris Johnson onwards, and there's more before him, but particularly I'm thinking the reason I mentioned Boris Johnson is because he was the man that supposedly was going to be in charge of this great new independent future, and he was really nothing of the sort, Ricky.
No. All goes back to Blair, doesn't it? That thing he signed a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it all started there, really.
And they all just went with it, really. They all went with that kind of bizarre centre ground, which probably played a good part back, post-war in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There would have been a reason to be in that place, but, not any longer. We've changed.
Because where I am at the moment in Ipswich, it's not a great place to be, really. It's okay, don't get me wrong, but I just don't go into town anymore.
Yeah.
You actually feel like you're just... you feel like a foreigner yourself, almost,
a lot of town centres are just, apart from anything else, apart from that point, they all need a lick of paint, don't they? Good Lord, how grotty have town centres got? I know some have always been a bit knackered, but, I've been to Ipswich a couple of times, always a fairly decent place. But, yeah, things change. Will Reform UK be responsible for making that change? Ricky, I have to move. Thank you. Great call again. Ricky in Ipswich, more from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. This is a reference, Ricky's point on how much you get if you are told you've got to stay in a hotel. As a migrant, allowance is £49.18 a week for essentials like food, clothing and toiletries. This is not cash, but often loaded on a payment card called an Aspen card. There you go. 3:30, this is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one from John, who says the Labour government will make sure that the revenue is squeezed so that reform cannot do what the people want and need. Jay, you do wonder what that relationship's going to be like. I tell you what, it's just, I can just imagine some half-wit. I mean, they have some terrible advisors around them. Labour have got quite a good, I was talking to somebody at the weekend about this, they've got quite a good comms department, which they kind of lifted most of that way of doing. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the policy, but they're very good at getting it out and having somebody there, spokesman, blah, blah, blah. They seem to be on it in that respect. But if anyone is going to advise the Labour government to do everything they can to strangle and curtail any kind of manifest progress in local authorities that reform represent, then Labour will be more dead than previously. Because if that is quite obvious what's going on, then it starts to look something almost treacherous in some respect. It's certainly an affront to democracy. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Tarquin down in London. Tarquin, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Ian, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, very well, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. I hope they put some compression on the line there.
Yeah, Amy likes a bit of compression.
Yeah, we talked at the top of the hour, I think it was, about what would I like to see reform do with, with their local government powers. Now, I think, forgive me if this has been covered because I haven't actually been able to listen in all of the show, but I think what struck me initially, it bears repeating anyway, and that is that I think what they can do with their limited powers, assuming obviously it's on the local level rather than national level, is that they look into, with their building and planning control regulations powers, to basically, I don't like the idea, I think this is the fudge that the Home Office have come in and they've gobbled up all the hotels, and I think that transferring the usage of a commercial premises from hotel to HMOs, which is effectively what they are, that's not legal. You have a due process to go through.
You'd think so. You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Well, I don't know. I'm no expert. So I'm just thinking that they can't just railroad these changes through and just play on our ignorance. You know what I mean? I think they're playing on our ignorance and just assuming that this is doable. When in fact, in a court of law, hold on, you can't just. And it takes time. It needs consultation. It needs to go out to consultation. Local people have to be involved, and we might just say no.
What if? I mean, would reform not be thinking about that? About taking this to a court?
Yes, I think that's. Yes, I think that's probably why I've got wind of this, and it's not me. I'm not, rocket science. But that's what because their powers are so limited so far. But there are things they can do to just scupper the plans of the blobs, mate, to do what they're doing, which is totally undemocratic and totally unaccountable from what I can see.
Do you sense that they will? Because, as we said earlier, you've got to somehow not just make a difference like in the paperwork, you've got to make a difference that people feel and sense.
Yes. Right. Well, what you're getting at here is the idea of integrity, trust, and of credibility of a new party, which is effectively what they are. If they can get some cred, some street cred of these people can deliver on a small scale. Hopefully, they'll do it on the big scale. That's possibly what we mean there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the big scale is where they will need it ultimately. Listen, great call, Tarquin. Thank you for that. Herbie is in Harrow. Herbie, how are you?
Very well, Ian. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Yeah, very good. What have you got for us?
Well, what I've got for you is this is the last chance corral for reform, to be honest. If they listen and talk to people, take on board what needs to be done, because every area, every borough is different. You've got to find out what the issues are. Show that you're there for them. You're not there for the party. You're there for them. The party's been formed so you can do something, so you can unite. And they must get together regularly to discuss what is actually going on day by day.
Yep.
Because if they take on the responsibility, people will trust them. If they don't do what they're supposed to do, they won't trust them. Bear in mind, they've only got this one chance. It's the very last chance now, Ian. Yeah. Don't mess it up. Keep it together. Work together. Be united. And as they say, united we stand, divided we fall. That's the only answer to the problem.
Our reform, though, Herbie, are they going to struggle in that there might not be lots of areas that there'll be some things they can make a difference, but they won't be big enough for people to notice, if that makes sense.
Well, the more you can get the message out there, Ian, the better it is. If you work as you're supposed to with the constituency to find out what your problems are and what their problems are, and then deal with them. I know you're not going to be able to resolve all the problems, Ian, but you will be able to do some of them, and you'll have to tell them. You have to tell the residents it is an issue. We haven't got the authority to do this. We haven't got the money to do that, but we will work on it so we can improve it. It's up to them to say what needs to be done and how it's got to be done. They've got to talk to the residents. They've got to talk to people. They've got to talk between themselves to discuss how it's going to be done and dealt with. Then they've got the answer.
Do you think many, or do you think there's a view that many of the things they'd like to do might be tricky, but if they keep a steady ship, will that be enough? If you create a sense, even if you can't physically see, you're not going to see a migrant hotel close down, but you might see or get a sense that they've turned a corner with the finances, they're looking after, they haven't messed up, there hasn't been some terrible scandal where one of their members has got 7 bodies buried in the back garden, everything's gone tickety-boo. As long as they keep it going, because there's a lot of people want them to fail. A lot of people go, let's hope they royally screw this up. Is that enough to just not mess it up?
Well, no, Ian, look, Rome wasn't built in a day.
No, I agree.
You know that. Rome was not built in a day. There are so many, look, there's been so much going wrong, been bad decisions, bad judgments, bad everything. We can't just deal with it in one go. It's going to take time, but it's the effort and it's the people. It's working together. It's going to make all the difference. Understanding what the problems are, how do we deal with those problems, how do we deal with the issues, how can we afford to deal with it. It's a case of all working together day by day to show what we can do and how we can do it. We've got to talk to people. People have got to talk to us. I'm not a mind reader. You're not a mind reader. I don't know what's on your mind, but talk to me, find out what we need to do, and let's do it. And if you don't do it, you've lost it.
There it is, Herbie. Passionate stuff from Herbie, as ever, in Harrow. Thank you to him. Trevor says, afternoon, Ian. Why is everyone so shocked that Reform would do this? Well, when you're on the front line, you can feel the mood. After all those in third class on the Titanic knew it was sinking way before those in first class sipping champagne and congratulate themselves on what a great job they have done. I have no doubt that the so-called legacy parties are in for a real shock. After all, about 100 years ago, there was a new party called Labour that took the nation by storm in the 21st century. That party was called Reform UK. What is it that people are hankering for? What's the big desire? Because I think as humans, in a very kind of confused world, I think we do live in a really confused world. I know every generation probably felt they were in a confused world. I'm sure, back in the 70s, I heard my mum or my dad say, kids today, there's an apocryphal story that Socrates was the first person that complained about other people's kids or something like that. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's always been our generation, God, this lot don't know they're born. Perhaps there's always been some of that. There was a simplicity. I definitely grew up in a very simple world that was sometimes infuriating and other times, and again, this is looking back on it, just wonderfully simplistic. The lack of screens, the lack of social media, just the most obvious examples, were great. The lack of, the sort of 24-hour-ness of our society, and I'm thinking in media terms, if you're watching TV, the streaming, the Netflix, the Disney, the non-stop ability to watch anything you want at any single time, never miss anything. There's no running home to watch a program and then you could record it and then you might mess up the recording, and even then, it was little things such as that. And it's hard to kind of go, that was the point that it was lost. But I'm pretty sure if you spoke to people in the 70s, they would probably go, well, back in the 40s or the 50s, no, we had, look what you've got now. You've got so much going on. You've got supermarkets. You can go, we never had supermarkets. We had a corner shop. Maybe Maybe we all do it to a degree. I do sense we're in an accelerated time, though. But what are we looking for? Are we looking for something that can never really be delivered, is, I suppose, the question here. Dean is in Bridgend. What have you got for us, Dean? Afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian.
Yeah.
I'm not from Bridgend anymore. I live in Newport now, in Lanternum.
OK. Welcome along either way.
We have a reform councillor here.
OK.
Yeah, in Wales, and he's doing absolutely fantastic.
That's good. Making inroads.
Yes, definitely doing stuff that Labour wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And now he's in. He is absolutely flying, and it's benefiting us all around here. He's put in an £800,000 add-on to the school, which is needed. Labour didn't do it. He's coming to the seat, and he's doing it.
Wow. Now, I would imagine as a single councillor, he's got to do that with some support, right?
Oh, yeah, but he's got the support.
Yeah.
He's got the support.
He's the one, he's kind of mobilised it and made stuff happen.
Yes, exactly. Like he's in our local paper, voicing stuff all the time,
Good
and
for
he's
him.
cracking. So if it's what reform's going to be, I bring it on because it's going to sort this country out.
Yeah. That's what we want to hear. That's a great local example, Dean. You're seeing it in action, and if there is some of that going on, I wonder whether borough councillors are more powerful in a curious way than county councillors. We'll get to the detail, I suppose, on that over the course of the next few days as this all pans out. Dean, thank you, mate. Great call. Great example of exactly what we're talking about here. What do they need to do to prove themselves? His example there is that he's already seen a reform councillor prove themselves and wants more of it. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about high streets as well. Save the High Street. We'll talk to the co-founder of that campaign. Labour risks taxing high streets out of existence. There's another area as well, that's kind of the digital world. The digital world, of course, has brought us online shopping. That has a natural, tangible, obvious effect on the high street, as do all those sort of out-of-town big kind of areas where there's a, big Halfords and a home base or whatever. You take the point. 0344 499 1000.
Nigel Farage and Reform do not have to do anything at the moment other than not be Labour or the Tories. All he has to do is not be Keir Starmer and not be Kenny Badenoch.
Right.
Now,
but also, I think what will also become a key battleground, of course, will be this business that was introduced by Zia Yusuf on Sunday and Laura Kunzberg and other shows, where he says, we're going to actively challenge the reform councils where we are, particularly in Kent, which will be an interesting one.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
June says, in Stourbridge, we had a major road closed where they actually put a footpath. Oh, I think I read this. Footpath in the middle of nowhere. What a waste. We're talking about wasting money. They should be dealing with potholes and stuff. I mean, that would be... If you had a kind of Reform UK pothole revolution, I know, you know, they would stand accused of, like, is that all you're about, flipping potholes? I mean, do they realise how important it is, the significance of having good roads? And I'll never tire of that analogy. You know, the Romans, you know, designed this stuff for us a long while ago. So I think it's a really totemic example, the Humble Road, of how well your local authority is doing. I know, you know, you can go, well, what about hospitals? You know, we want machines that go ping, that save sick children's lives. Of course we do. But there's something so symbolic about your simple road being in good nick. You can't get the road straight, then we've gone back 2,000 years. This is bad territory. Tony in Selby says, what I need from Reform is to give us transparency in how my council tax is being spent. For instance, what percentage of council tax is being spent on illegals? We know the government do not want us to know, as there would be an outcry if we did know. I understand that. That's the way it is. But you could argue that that information could be known now already without necessarily Reform being in power in any governments. Let's quickly return to the Commons. Security Minister Dan Jarvis is giving an update on the counter-terror arrests of Iranian nationals. Very important story. Let's listen to the Minister. We don't appear to have any sound on that. We have moving pictures, but at the moment, no sound. We'll try and put that right and bring that to you. David in Suffolk, if Reform want to make the changes they want, then all they need to do is sack the existing chief executive and appoint one that's aligned with their policies. The chief executive is appointed by full council, so in the councils where they have full control, this is very much achievable, although I think I'm right in saying the chief executive is not meant to be a political appointment. So that would kind of go, if that is right, stand to be corrected on that. But if that is correct, and I think it is, then that would be the trouble you'd end up with. But I can absolutely see the need, David. Thank you for that. Now, Labour has been warned it risks taxing high streets out of existence as rising costs force more shops and restaurants to close. Business leaders have hit out at higher national insurance, reduced rate relief and minimum wage hikes, blaming them for job losses. It comes as nearly 4,000 high street firms shut last year, with footfall still well below pre-pandemic levels. Let's speak with Alex Schlagman, who's Save the High Street co-founder. Good afternoon to you, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Nice to have you on. Listen, it's not a conversation that's entirely brand new, but it does seem to be getting ever more urgent.
Yeah, so look, the successful failure of high streets impacts everybody. You know, there's a wider context here than just the products and services you buy. These are the places we interact in the real world. They're the backbone of local economies. And quite frankly, we need to invest in high streets to make sure that they are changing for the better, not put more pressure on than there was last year.
Yeah, spot on. The difficulty is, and I've lost count of how many people I've spoken to locally who were considering setting up a shop, you know, high street bound, but they look at the business rates, they look at the national insurance figures for staff, employer national insurance, and they just can't make the numbers work. I mean, it's not even hard to, you don't need Alan Sugar to work this one out. I mean, it's quite simple. It's just too blooming expensive.
Look, and here at SaveTheHighStreet.org, we're very focused around changing the economics to make it better for high street entrepreneurs at every stage of the journey, from start-up to scale-up. And some of the things that we've been looking at here have really been pushing us in the right direction, actually. So, you know, the entrepreneurial energy is clear for the UK economy. We're running these competitions around shopping centres to give people a chance to try your offering out for 3 months before you make a longer term commitment, with loads of support around you. We're getting hundreds of people apply for the opportunity. And once they get started, they can get it working. But the more costs you keep loading up, as much as we can help them improve the trading of their business at the core, if you keep adding on new costs to these businesses, there's going to be more and more of those that aren't able to make it.
It will often be said, Alex, there's an irredeemable reality on all of this. You know, the internet is where maximum damage really came. Before that, those out-of-town complexes where there's a big Sainsbury's and a big Halfords and all that stuff. Yes, and then, of course, the icing on the top of all of that are massive business rates and goodness knows what else from local authorities. Is it... some would say cynically, is it a cause that can ever really be saved?
Well, look, let's look at some of those big challenges you talk about. So, you know, internet kills high street. It's the big headline. We like to read about that in the newspaper. But the reality is, I mentioned those competitions we've been running. A high proportion of the people that are entering those are digital-first brands. They're online e-commerce businesses who are taking that step into taking the real world. Wow. And the biggest online-only brands in the world all have a high street strategy. They're all trying to join the dots between online and offline. And that's just product retail. You know, let's think about food and beverage. Let's think about services. Let's think about the more experience-focused economy. There's loads of people out there that want to activate physical space. I don't think we have a wider existential challenge around people wanting to actually launch on high streets and in shopping centres. I think we've just got to create the conditions for them to succeed. Yeah. Is anyone in government seriously listening to this, Alex? Are there figures in Parliament that are advocating everything you're talking about here? Hey, do you know what, Ian? And often we're asked this, whether it's to do with local government or central government. Our experience dealing with people in the public sector is that the intent is there. You know, there's not that there aren't people working in regeneration teams and economic development teams in councils that are spending, quite frankly, their life and they're putting their professional careers on the line to make interventions happen to benefit high streets. The challenge is a little bit more systemic than this. It's not that people don't want to back high streets. It's that, you know, top down, the Labour government clearly wants to invest huge amounts into public services, which is understandable. And they're trying to find the money from different places. They realise that, you know, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just tax Amazon? Well, the problem is, you try and tax these giant online-only businesses, they move around, they play with the legislative system, and you end up getting nothing from them. So this is less about, are the individuals there actually interested in this? And often I do challenge it because we have kind of debates, whether it's on radio shows like this, and politicians come on, and at all sides of the fence, from left to right across the political spectrum, everyone seems to want to get behind high street. Then the question comes is like, what are you actually doing to make a difference? And when the Labour government came in, the High Street Manifesto was positive. You know, it looked really good. There was a lot of commitments, and there was a commitment to really rethink the business rates. But what's happening now is that the increase in national insurance, basically the removal of a big part of the discount on business rates and the minimum wage going up is like a triple threat hitting a lot of these businesses. And it's you know, I was about to say, and it's hard to know where, you know, is there a point where somebody stops and says this madness has gone too far? Listen, Alex, I have to step in, so I'm really sorry, but thank you. Great thorough stuff. Alex Schlagman, who is the Save the High Street co-founder. Thank you to him. Thank you to Jeremy Kyle.
Alex Schlagman, that's a great name, isn't it?
It's a good, powerful name.
So let's cut straight to the chase, apart from the fact that you weren't here on a bank holiday. Of course we'll talk winter fuel, and of course we'll talk net zero, but my favourite story of the day, apart from Donald Trump dressing as the Pope and saying that Catholics haven't got a sense of humour, that will go everywhere, is the women's rights campaigners who stormed that pool in Hampstead Heath where men go swimming with beards on and placards saying, "No ghoulies in our poolies." I love that. No ghoulies. That's a great word. word, isn't it? Ghoulies.
Yeah, the ghoulies works. Poolies, I'm not so sure.
I'm not so sure. No ghouls in our pools, but no ghoulies in our poolies.
It kind of works. And what they were doing and the point that we're trying to prove, I just thought was brilliant. And, the one that got in with the little moustache on, swimming away.
We've all met a woman with a tash, haven't we?
Sadly, yes.
I was working. My wife said she was taking the kids out for a quiet afternoon.
Yeah, we went. I went to the zoo.
Did you?
Yes, to see the rhinos.
You went to the zoo. Did you go to? Good show.
It was very, particularly on the reform stuff. Now the work starts for reform, of course.
It's very interesting. Yesterday we had the announcement about the flags. You can only...
Yes.
We made that announcement yesterday on Drive, and then within 5 minutes the Labour Party went, yes, but I mean, what about the Ukrainian flag? Well, you just can't just say, yes, it's a good idea, can you?
That would be the